Woman helps man with flat tire. He falls in love with her simplicity, but discovers that she is his ex-fiance's sister, and even so, he does everything for her. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The rain poured relentlessly as Daniel Matthews pulled his car to the side of the isolated country road. His wipers struggled against the downpour and the flat tire couldn't have happened at a worse time. He was already running late for an important meeting with potential investors, a meeting that could save his struggling architecture firm. At 34, Daniel had experienced more than his fair share of setbacks, and this punctured tire felt like the universe's latest joke at his expense. He stepped out into the rain, his expensive Italian leather shoes immediately soaking in a puddle. His tailored suit offered little protection against the elements as he popped open the trunk to retrieve the spare tire. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the desolate stretch of road ahead. Not a single car had passed by in the 15 minutes since he'd stopped. Daniel's hands fumbled with the jack as the rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead. His phone showed no service bars, another stroke of bad luck. The meeting was scheduled for 9 and his watch now read 8:15. Even if he changed the tire in record time, he'd never make it to the city on schedule. "Need some help?" a voice called out. Daniel turned to see a small blue pickup truck parked behind his BMW. A woman was approaching wearing a yellow raincoat that seemed too bright for the gloomy day. She walked with purpose, her rubber boots splashing through puddles without hesitation. "The spare's no good if you place the jack there," she said, kneeling beside him without waiting for an invitation. "The frame will bend. Here, let me." Before Daniel could protest, she repositioned the jack and began working with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved with confidence, seemingly unbothered by the mud and grime. "I'm Daniel," he offered, feeling strangely useless as she took over the tire change. "Eliza," she replied without looking up. "Eliza Kane." There was something refreshing about her directness. No unnecessary small talk, no complaints about the weather, just focused attention on the task at hand. Within minutes, she had the car jacked up and was removing the lug nuts with surprising strength. "Do you always stop to help stranded motorists?" Daniel asked, holding an umbrella over her that did little good considering how soaked they both already were. "Only the ones who look completely hopeless," she answered, a hint of amusement in her voice. When she finally glanced up at him, Daniel was struck by her eyes, a warm amber that seemed to hold the sunshine absent from the sky. Her face was free of makeup, rain droplets clinging to her eyelashes and running down her freckled cheeks. "I'm not completely hopeless," he defended, feeling a smile tug at his lips despite his predicament. "Just a bit out of practice." "Clearly," Eliza said, rolling the flat tire aside and positioning the spare. "You architect types spend too much time with blueprints and not enough time with basic life skills." Daniel blinked in surprise. "How did you know I'm an architect?" She nodded toward his car. "Fancy car, expensive suit, and the blueprints visible in your back seat. Plus, you have that look." "What look?" "The I design spaces but rarely get my hands dirty look." Her words could have been insulting, but her tone held no malice, just matter-of-fact observation. Daniel found himself laughing, tension melting from his shoulders despite the cold rain. Guilty as charged. As Eliza secured the spare tire, Daniel noticed details about her he'd missed initially. Her raincoat was well worn at the cuffs. The truck behind her had seen better days. The bumper slightly dented and the paint faded from years of exposure. Yet there was something undeniably elegant about her movements, a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "There," she said, standing and wiping her hands on her jeans. "That should get you where you need to go, but don't push it past 50 miles per hour. It's only a temporary spare." "Thank you," Daniel said sincerely. "You're a lifesaver. Please let me pay you for your trouble." He reached for his wallet. Eliza's expression shifted, a shadow crossing her features. "I didn't stop for money, Mr. Matthews." I know, but I insist. Daniel paused. Wait, I never told you my last name. A flash of something, recognition, caution, passed through her eyes before she shrugged. It's on your business card. Fell out of your pocket when you knelt down. She pointed to a soggy card on the ground. Daniel picked it up, frowning slightly. Something felt off, but he couldn't place it. At least let me buy you coffee sometime. I owe you that much. Eliza hesitated, then pulled a small notebook from her coat pocket and scribbled something. This is my number, but don't feel obligated. As she turned to leave, Daniel called out, Are you sure you don't want anything for your help? She glanced back, rain streaming down her face. Just pay it forward sometime, architect. With that, she climbed into her truck and drove away, leaving Daniel staring after her with an inexplicable feeling that their meeting was somehow significant. The spare tire got him to his meeting, though 15 minutes late. Surprisingly, the investors were understanding, even impressed by his determination to make it despite his transportation issues. By afternoon, he had secured the funding his firm desperately needed, and his mind returned to the woman in the yellow raincoat. Daniel's apartment felt particularly empty that evening. At 34, he'd grown accustomed to solitude, but something about the day's encounter had stirred a longing he thought he'd buried after Vanessa. The relationship had ended badly 3 years ago when she'd left him a week before their wedding. The betrayal had shaped him, made him cautious, focused on work to the exclusion of personal connections. He found Eliza's number in his pocket, slightly smudged but still legible. He hesitated, finger hovering over the call button. Was it too soon? Would he seem desperate? Questions that hadn't crossed his mind in years suddenly seemed important. Before he could talk himself out of it, he pressed call. Hello? Her voice sounded different, softer, almost hesitant. Eliza? It's Daniel, the hopeless architect from this morning. A pause, then a quiet laugh. I remember. Your meeting go okay? Better than okay. I got the funding and I have you to thank for it. Pretty sure you handled the presentation part yourself, she countered. True, but I wouldn't have made it there without your help. That's actually why I'm calling. I was wondering if I could take you to dinner tomorrow, as a thank you. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. I don't think that's a good idea, she finally said. Daniel felt a disproportionate disappointment. Coffee, then? I promise I'm not an axe murderer, just a grateful guy who wants to properly thank the person who helped him out. Another pause. There's a cafe called Rosewood on 5th Street. Tomorrow at 2? I'll be there, Daniel said, unable to contain his smile. And Daniel, wear something that won't be ruined by coffee spills. Your suit today probably cost more than my monthly rent. The line went dead before he could respond, leaving him both amused and intrigued. There was something about Eliza Kane that broke through the carefully constructed walls he'd built after Vanessa. Something authentic and unpolished that drawn him in. Rosewood Cafe was nothing like the upscale establishments Daniel typically frequented. It occupied the ground floor of an old converted house, with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. The atmosphere was cozy, unpretentious, and immediately welcoming. Eliza was already there when he arrived, seated in a worn leather armchair by the window. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her complexion, her chestnut hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. Without the raincoat and the downpour, Daniel was struck by how lovely she was, not in the polished, Instagram-ready way he was accustomed to, but in a natural, unaffected manner that felt increasingly rare. You found it, she said as he approached. And I followed your advice, Daniel replied, gesturing to his casual attire, jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Almost didn't recognize you without the drowning businessman look, she teased. A waitress approached, and Daniel noticed how Eliza greeted her by name, asking about her classes. The easy familiarity spoke of regular visits and genuine interest in others' lives, small interactions that Daniel realized had become foreign to him in his climb up the corporate ladder. After ordering, they fell into conversation that flowed with surprising ease. Eliza worked as a botanical illustrator for scientific publications and occasionally taught art classes at the community center. Her passion for plants was evident in the way her hands moved animatedly when describing a rare species she'd recently illustrated. "What about you?" she asked. "Is architecture what you always wanted to do?" Daniel considered the question. "Yes and no. I always loved designing spaces, but the business side wasn't part of the dream. Recently, it's been consuming more of my time than actual design work." "Is that why you look so tired?" Eliza asked bluntly. Daniel blinked, surprised by her directness. People in his circle typically pretended not to notice such things, maintaining the polite fiction that everyone was thriving. "That obvious, huh? You have talent lines," she said, touching the corner of her own eye. "But lately they've been doubling as worry lines." "Talent lines," Daniel repeated, amused by the term. "I like that better than calling them wrinkles. They're not wrinkles, they're evidence of focus and commitment." Eliza sipped her coffee. "But even talented architects need to rest sometimes." As the afternoon progressed, Daniel found himself increasingly drawn to Eliza's perspective. She viewed the world through a different lens, finding beauty in imperfection, value in simplicity. Her life choices weren't dictated by status or expectation, but by what genuinely brought her joy. "Your turn to ask a personal question," she prompted after telling him about her small house on the outskirts of town, complete with a greenhouse she'd built herself. Daniel hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Why did you really stop to help me yesterday? Most people would have driven past." Eliza's expression grew thoughtful. "My father always taught me that we're all just one flat tire away from needing a little kindness." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Plus, you looked absolutely miserable standing there in your fancy suit." Daniel laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. "I was miserable, and I'm still not convinced you didn't recognize my complete incompetence and take pity on me." "That too," she admitted with a smile that transformed her entire face, creating dimples in her cheeks that Daniel found utterly charming. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. As they finally prepared to leave, Daniel found himself reluctant to end their time together. "Can I see you again?" he asked as they stood outside the cafe. Eliza studied him, her amber eyes serious. "Daniel, I should tell you something." But whatever she intended to say was interrupted by a voice that sent an icy shock through Daniel's system. "Danny? Is that you?" He turned to find himself staring into the face that had haunted his dreams and fueled his nightmares for 3 years. Vanessa Armstrong, his ex-fiancée who had walked out of his life without looking back, stood before him, as stunning and poised as ever, and beside him, Eliza had gone completely still. "Vanessa." Daniel's voice emerged as little more than a whisper, his mouth suddenly dry. 3 years of carefully constructed emotional barriers threatened to crumble at the mere sight of her. She looked exactly as he remembered. Perfectly styled blonde hair, impeccable makeup, designer clothes that showcased her slender frame. The engagement ring he'd spent months saving for was gone, replaced by a larger, more ostentatious diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight. "What a coincidence!" Vanessa's voice carried the practiced enthusiasm of someone accustomed to navigating social situations. Her gaze shifted to Eliza, and something flashed across her features: recognition, followed by unmistakable discomfort. "Elizabeth," Vanessa said stiffly, her smile tightening. "I didn't know you were in town." "Elizabeth?" Daniel looked between the two women, confusion mounting. Eliza, or Elizabeth, stood rigid beside him, her earlier warmth replaced by a guarded expression he hadn't seen before. "I've been back for almost a year," Eliza replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Mom's been keeping you updated, I'm sure." Daniel's mind raced to process the interaction unfolding before him. "You two know each other?" A strangled laugh escaped Vanessa. "You could say that." She extended her manicured hand toward Eliza in a theatrical gesture. "Elizabeth Kane Armstrong, my little sister." The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. He took an involuntary step backward, his gaze darting between the women. Now that it had been pointed out, he could see subtle similarities, the shape of their eyes, the angle of their jawlines. But where Vanessa was all polished perfection, Eliza embodied natural authenticity. "Half-sister," Eliza corrected quietly. "Different fathers." The tension between them was palpable, years of unspoken history hanging in the air. Daniel struggled to find words, his mind cycling through implications. Had Eliza known who he was all along? Was her roadside assistance merely a calculated encounter? "Danny and I were engaged," Vanessa explained to Eliza, though her tone suggested this wasn't new information. "It didn't work out." "That's one way of putting it," Daniel muttered before he could stop himself. Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in response. "Ancient history now. I'm married to Richard. You remember, from the investment firm?" She flashed her oversized ring as evidence. "We just bought a summer house in the Hamptons. I'm in town visiting Mother." Each word felt deliberately chosen to highlight the life Daniel had failed to provide. He glanced at Eliza, searching for any sign that would explain her presence in his life. Her expression remained unreadable, but he noticed her hands. Those capable hands that had so effortlessly changed his tire were now clenched tightly at her sides. "How long have you two been seeing each other?" Vanessa asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "We're not," Daniel began. "I helped him with a flat tire yesterday," Eliza interjected. "This was just a thank you coffee." Vanessa's laugh held no warmth. "Always the good Samaritan, Lizzie. Some things never change." She checked her watch, a gesture Daniel remembered well from their relationship, usually preceding an excuse to leave. "I should get going. Richard is waiting. We're having dinner with the Prestons tonight. You remember James Preston, the state senator?" The name-dropping was deliberate, another reminder of the social circles Vanessa now moved in. Daniel felt a familiar sense of inadequacy rising, one he thought he'd outgrown. "It was surprising to see you, Danny." Vanessa leaned in to air-kiss his cheek, her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. She turned to Eliza with a tight smile. "Tell Mom I'll stop by tomorrow." And then she was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and a weight of questions hanging in the air. For several moments, neither Daniel nor Eliza spoke. Around them, the world continued. Pedestrians walked by, traffic moved, a street musician played guitar half a block away. But between them, time seemed suspended. "You knew," Daniel finally said, the words emerging more accusation than question. Eliza met his gaze directly. "Yes." "Since when?" "Since I saw your name on the business card. Before that, you were just a man with a flat tire." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of the situation. "So you helped me, knowing I was your sister's ex-fiancé and didn't think to mention it?" "I was going to tell you today," Eliza said, gesturing toward the cafe they'd just left. "That's why I agreed to meet. I wanted to explain in person." "Explain what exactly? Why you pretended not to know who I was?" "I never pretended anything, Daniel." Her voice remained calm, though he could sense an underlying tension. "I helped someone who needed it. The connection to Vanessa was complicated. I needed time to figure out how to approach it." Daniel laughed humorlessly. "Complicated. That's one way to describe finding out I've been having coffee with my ex's sister." "Half-sister," Eliza corrected again, a hint of sharpness entering her tone. "And I'm nothing like Vanessa." "Clearly," Daniel retorted, immediately regretting his harsh tone when hurt flashed across Eliza's face. She took a step back. "I should go." "Wait." Daniel reached for her arm instinctively, then stopped himself. "I'm sorry. This is just a lot to process. Can we talk about this?" Eliza hesitated, glancing in the direction Vanessa had disappeared. "Not here. There's a park 2 blocks over." They walked in silence, the earlier ease of their conversation replaced by a strained awareness of the new context surrounding their acquaintance. The park was relatively empty on the weekday afternoon, and they found a bench beneath an old oak tree, sitting with careful distance between them. "I should have told you immediately," Eliza began, her gaze fixed on the children playing across the park. "When I saw your name, I recognized it from all the times Vanessa talked about you." "You knew about me?" Daniel asked, surprised. Eliza nodded. "Vanessa and I aren't close. We were raised mostly in separate households after our mother remarried. But when she got engaged, she made sure everyone in the extended family knew about Daniel Matthews, the promising young architect." She gave him a sidelong glance. "She sent photos. That's how I recognized you standing in the rain." Daniel absorbed this information, memories resurfacing of the few times Vanessa had mentioned a younger sister living with her father in some rural area, always with a dismissive tone that suggested the sibling was hardly worth discussing. "Why help me then?" "Vanessa didn't exactly end things amicably. Because contrary to what my sister might have told you, not everyone in our family is calculating every move." Eliza picked at a loose thread on her dress. "I saw someone who needed help, so I helped. It wasn't until after, when I was driving away, that I realized I should have said something." "And then I called you," Daniel said, beginning to understand. "And then you called. I almost didn't answer." She met his gaze directly. "But I thought you deserved an explanation. That's why I agreed to coffee." "So this was what, closure? A chance to satisfy curiosity about your sister's ex?" "No." The sharpness returned to her voice. "It was me trying to do the right thing. Believe it or not, Daniel, my sister's romantic history doesn't feature prominently in my decision-making." Her candor caught him off guard. It was so different from Vanessa's carefully crafted responses, always designed to present herself in the best possible light. "I'm sorry," he said again, meaning it this time. "This isn't your fault. It's just, seeing Vanessa again was unexpected, and finding out about your connection through you." Eliza finished his sentence. "I get it. Finding out someone isn't who you thought they were is disorienting." There was something in her tone that suggested this wasn't just about him. "You sound like you speak from experience." A shadow crossed her features. "Let's just say Vanessa isn't the only one in our family who's mastered the art of reinvention." Before Daniel could ask what she meant, his phone rang, his project manager calling about the newly funded development. "I need to take this," he said apologetically. Eliza nodded, standing up. "You should get that. I should head home anyway." "Wait!" Daniel covered the phone. "Can we talk again? I'd like to understand all of this." She studied him, seeming to weigh her response carefully. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Daniel. Vanessa may act like your relationship is ancient history, but there's more to the story than you know." "What does that mean?" Eliza shook her head. "It means some paths are better not crossed twice. You have your life, I have mine, and Vanessa." She trailed off, looking toward the horizon. Vanessa always gets what she wants in the end. There was a warning in her words that Daniel couldn't fully decipher, but before he could press further, his phone continued its persistent ringing. "Goodbye, Daniel." Eliza turned to leave, her figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. "Eliza," he called after her, but she continued walking, her stride purposeful and unwavering. Daniel answered the call, distracted by the retreating figure of the woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly just 24 hours ago. By the time he finished the conversation, she was gone, leaving him with more questions than answers. That evening, unable to focus on work, Daniel found himself searching for information about Eliza online. Unlike her sister, whose social media presence was carefully curated and extensive, Eliza maintained minimal digital footprint. He found only a simple professional website showcasing her botanical illustrations, exquisite, detailed renderings of plants ranging from common garden varieties to rare exotic species. The work displayed remarkable talent and scientific precision. A small About section provided little personal information beyond her educational background in botanical science and fine arts. No social media links, no personal photos. It was as if she deliberately maintained her privacy in a world where most people broadcast the details of their lives. The contrast with Vanessa couldn't have been more striking. His ex-fiancée's Instagram account was a calculated display of her supposedly perfect life: exotic vacations, charity galas, carefully staged photos with her new husband, each image designed to evoke envy and admiration. Daniel closed the laptop, troubled by the day's revelations. He couldn't shake the feeling that Eliza's appearance in his life wasn't mere coincidence, yet her genuine nature seemed at odds with any ulterior motive. And what had she meant about there being more to the story of his relationship with Vanessa? Despite all rational arguments against pursuing further contact, he found himself drawn to the enigmatic woman in the yellow raincoat, a woman who shared blood with the person who had almost destroyed him, yet seemed her complete opposite in every way that mattered. His phone pinged with a text message. Unknown number. "I'm sorry about today. There's something you should know. Meet me at Finnegan's nursery tomorrow at 10 if you want the truth. E." Finnegan's nursery sprawled across 3 acres at the edge of town, a lush oasis of greenhouses and outdoor gardens. Daniel arrived 15 minutes early, parking his BMW between a mud-splattered pickup truck and a delivery van. The contrast wasn't lost on him, his polished vehicle looking distinctly out of place among the more utilitarian options. A light mist hung in the morning air, giving the nursery an ethereal quality. Daniel followed a gravel path past displays of flowering shrubs and ornamental trees, uncertain where he was supposed to meet Eliza. He dressed casually in jeans and a Henley, having learned his lesson about appropriate attire around her. "Can I help you find something?" asked an elderly man in dirt-stained overalls, eyeing Daniel's clean boots with mild amusement. "I'm looking for Eliza Kane," Daniel replied. "She asked me to meet her here." The man's weathered face brightened. "Lizzie's in the rare specimen greenhouse. Follow this path to the back, can't miss it." He gave Daniel an appraising look. "You the architect?" Daniel nodded, surprised. "Thought so. She mentioned you might stop by." The man extended a soil-covered hand. "Jim Finnegan. Lizzie's been my best employee for years." "She works here?" Daniel asked, shaking the man's hand despite his city-dweller instinct to avoid the dirt. "Part-time, does our specialized botanical illustrations and helps with the rare specimens." Pride colored Jim's voice. "Got a genuine talent with the trickiest plants. Practically whispers them back to health." Daniel thanked him and continued down the path, processing this new information. Each interaction revealed another layer to Eliza that contradicted what little Vanessa had shared about her simple half-sister. The rare specimen greenhouse stood apart from the others, its glass walls fogged with humidity. Daniel pushed open the door, immediately enveloped by warm, moist air thick with earthy scents. The space hummed with life, exotic flowers in vibrant hues, unusual foliage of varying textures, miniature trees contorted into artistic shapes. He found Eliza kneeling beside a potting bench, carefully transplanting something with purple-veined leaves. She wore faded jeans and a green t-shirt with the nursery's logo, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Completely in her element, she radiated a contentment Daniel rarely observed in his high-pressure professional circles. She looked up as the door closed behind him, her expression cautious but resolved. "You came." "Your text wasn't exactly something I could ignore," Daniel replied, remaining by the door. "You said you had the truth." Eliza set down her gardening tools and stood, wiping her hands on a towel tucked into her back pocket. "Walk with me?" She led him deeper into the greenhouse, past specimens labeled with Latin names he couldn't pronounce. The narrow paths forced them to walk close together, occasionally brushing shoulders as they navigated around larger plants. "This is a Rothschild slipper orchid," she said, stopping beside an unusual flower that resembled an elaborate golden shoe. "Extremely rare, nearly extinct in the wild, worth thousands on the black market." Daniel studied the peculiar bloom. "It's beautiful, but what does this have to do with—" "My father was a botanist," Eliza interrupted. "He specialized in endangered species conservation, traveled to remote locations, lived among indigenous communities learning their plant knowledge." Her fingers hovered over the orchid without touching it. "He met my mother during a fundraising gala for the Botanical Society. She was already married to Vanessa's father, unhappily, as she tells it." Understanding began to dawn. "Your mother had an affair," Eliza nodded. "A brief but passionate one, according to family lore. When she discovered she was pregnant, she had a choice to make." Her amber eyes met his. "She chose security and social position over love. Told my biological father to disappear, stayed with her wealthy husband. But he clearly found out you weren't his. Eventually, the marriage lasted until I was 7. When they divorced, my mother kept Vanessa in the city, maintained their lavish lifestyle. I was sent to live with my biological father in a small farmhouse surrounded by greenhouses." Eliza's voice held no self-pity, just matter-of-fact acceptance. 2 daughters, 2 very different paths. They continued walking, the humidity pressing against them like a living presence. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel asked. "Because you need to understand where Vanessa and I come from to make sense of what happened between you two." Eliza stopped beside a small pond where water lilies floated. "And because I need to explain why I helped you that day on the road." Daniel leaned against a nearby table. "I'm listening." 3 years ago, when Vanessa was engaged to you, she came to visit me, something she rarely did voluntarily. She was distraught. Eliza's focus seemed to turn inward, accessing difficult memories. "She told me she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd fallen in love with someone else, Richard, but didn't know how to break things off with you." Daniel felt a familiar ache at the confirmation of Vanessa's infidelity, though time had dulled its sharpness. "I advised her to be honest with you, to end things properly before moving forward with Richard." Eliza's expression hardened slightly. "She didn't take my advice. Instead, she simply disappeared from your life without explanation, letting you piece together what happened through mutual friends and social media." "Why would she do that?" Daniel asked, though he'd asked himself the same question countless times over the years. "Because Vanessa doesn't like confrontation that portrays her in an unflattering light," Eliza replied. "She wanted to avoid the messy reality of being the villain in your story." Daniel absorbed this, recognizing the truth in it. Even during their relationship, Vanessa had masterfully avoided difficult conversations, preferring to reshape situations to maintain her preferred self-image. She also, Eliza continued more hesitantly, may have had financial incentives to end things abruptly. "What does that mean?" "Richard's family is significantly wealthier than even Vanessa was accustomed to, and they made certain arrangements conditional on her availability." The implication sent a chill through Daniel despite the greenhouse heat. "Are you saying she was paid to leave me?" "Not directly, no, but Richard's parents made it clear that their support of the relationship, including Richard's position in the family business and access to family properties, was contingent on resolving any prior entanglements immediately." Eliza met his gaze. "Vanessa chose luxury and status. Again." The parallel to her mother's choice wasn't lost on Daniel. "And you know this because she called me after she left you, asking me to justify her decision." Eliza's voice tightened. She wanted absolution from the one person in her life who had chosen differently than she consistently does. I couldn't give her what she wanted. Daniel moved away from the lilies, needing space to process this information. That doesn't explain why you helped me on the road, or why you agreed to coffee. Eliza took a deep breath. When I recognized you that day, standing in the rain looking so defeated, I felt responsible somehow, like the universe was giving me a chance to make up for my sister's cruelty. She shook her head. It sounds ridiculous saying it out loud. Not ridiculous, Daniel said quietly. Just unexpected. I told myself I'd just help with the tire and that would be it. Karmic debt paid. A rueful smile touched her lips. But then you called, and I realized I couldn't just walk away without explaining. And now? What's the plan now that your conscience is clear? The question hung between them, surrounded by the living witnesses of exotic plants. That depends, she said carefully. On what you want, Daniel. Vanessa knows we've met. She's already called me twice since yesterday, asking questions I've chosen not to answer yet. Getting involved with me, even as a friend, would complicate your life in ways you might not anticipate. I'm a grown man, Eliza. I can decide what complications I'm willing to accept. Can you? She challenged. 3 years ago, my sister left you without explanation, and you're still carrying that wound. I can see it in how you responded to her yesterday. If we become whatever, you'll be constantly reminded of that betrayal. You're not Vanessa, Daniel countered, repeating her own words from yesterday. No, but I share her blood, and in her world that makes me a threat. Eliza's expression grew troubled. Vanessa doesn't handle perceived threats well. Daniel closed the distance between them, struck by the genuine concern in her eyes, concern for him rather than herself. What are you afraid she'll do? I'm not afraid, Eliza clarified. I just know my sister. She's invested heavily in her narrative about your breakup. My presence in your life contradicts that narrative. She won't like it. I don't particularly care what Vanessa likes anymore, Daniel said, surprised to find he meant it. Eliza studied him for a long moment. There's something else you should know before you decide anything. The real reason I asked you here. She led him to a small office tucked in the corner of the greenhouse. On the desk sat an open portfolio of botanical illustrations, exquisite hand-drawn renderings of plants in various stages of development. These are amazing, Daniel said, genuinely impressed by the artistry and scientific detail. Thank you, but that's not what I wanted to show you. She withdrew an envelope from a desk drawer and handed it to him. These arrived 2 days before I helped you with the flat tire. Inside were photographs. Daniel at various locations around the city, entering his office building, at a construction site, dining at a restaurant. The images had clearly been taken without his knowledge. Accompanying them was a note in elegant handwriting. Keep an eye on him for me, just until I'm back in town. I worry he's still not over us. V. Daniel stared at the contents, ice forming in his stomach. Vanessa sent you these? Why? I think, Eliza said carefully, she wanted to ensure you weren't moving on in ways that might contradict the story she's built about your relationship ending. The story where she's the sympathetic character who had to escape an obsessive ex. That's insane, Daniel whispered, leafing through the photos. We haven't spoken in 3 years. I know. That's why I was so shocked by these. Eliza reclaimed the envelope. I had no intention of spying on you. In fact, I was planning to tell Vanessa to stop this unhealthy behavior when she returned, and then, by complete coincidence, you found me on the side of the road with a flat tire, Daniel finished. Did you think I engineered that somehow? That I was stalking you? Briefly, yes, Eliza admitted. But it became clear pretty quickly that you had no idea who I was. The confusion on your face yesterday when Vanessa called me Elizabeth confirmed it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, struggling to reconcile this information with his perception of his past relationship. Had Vanessa been monitoring him all this time? The thought made his skin crawl. "I'm showing you this," Eliza continued, "because you deserve to know what you might be dealing with. Vanessa's version of events often requires maintenance." Outside the greenhouse, rain began to fall, pattering against the glass ceiling in a gentle rhythm. Daniel watched droplets trace paths downward, feeling strangely calm despite the disturbing revelation. "Thank you for being honest," he finally said. "Not many people would be." Eliza returned the envelope to the drawer. "Honesty feels like the least I can offer, considering." "Considering what?" Daniel asked. Her amber eyes met his, vulnerability and quiet strength coexisting in her gaze. "Considering I've been thinking about you since the moment I drove away in the rain." The rain intensified, drumming against the greenhouse roof like impatient fingers. Neither Daniel nor Eliza moved, her admission hanging in the humid air between them. The confession, so straightforward, so unlike Vanessa's calculated manipulations, left Daniel momentarily speechless. "I shouldn't have said that," Eliza said into the silence, averting her eyes. "It complicates things further." "I've been thinking about you too," Daniel replied, surprising himself with his candor. "Since you drove away in that blue truck." Her gaze returned to his, searching for sincerity. "Even knowing who I am?" "Especially knowing who you are." He took a step closer. "You're nothing like your sister, Eliza. That's becoming clearer with every conversation." A small smile touched her lips. "Most people don't consider that a compliment. Vanessa has always been the golden child. Beautiful, charming, sophisticated. And calculating, manipulative, and superficial," Daniel added. He gestured to the photographs of exotic plants adorning the small office walls. "I'd choose substance over surface any day." The greenhouse door banged open, startling them both. Jim Finnegan's voice called through the foliage. "Lizzie, got an emergency with the Amorphophallus shipment. Need your expertise." Eliza sighed. "I have to deal with this. It's a rare corpse flower delivery we've been waiting months for." She hesitated. "Will you wait? Or perhaps you'd like to see?" "A corpse flower?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Sounds pleasant." She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the rainy day. "It's called that because it smells like rotting meat when it blooms, but it's also one of the most fascinating plants in existence. Blooms once every 7 to 10 years, and only for 24 to 48 hours. Her enthusiasm was contagious. "I'd love to see it." Daniel followed Eliza through the greenhouse to where Jim and 2 other workers were carefully unpacking a massive pot containing what looked like a single burgundy spear emerging from the soil. "Temperature dropped during transport," Jim was saying, concern etched into his weathered face. "Might have damaged the spadix." Eliza knelt beside the strange plant, examining it with gentle hands. "The spathe looks intact, and there's no discoloration on the spadix." She looked up at Daniel. "This is the largest unbranched inflorescence in the world. When it fully opens, it will be quite a spectacle, though admittedly a smelly one." Daniel watched as she directed the careful moving of the plant to a temperature-controlled section of the greenhouse. Her knowledge, confidence, and the respect the other workers showed her revealed yet another dimension to this increasingly intriguing woman. "You really do whisper them back to health," he commented when she rejoined him. "Plants are straightforward," she replied. "They respond to what they need: light, water, nutrients, care, no games, no hidden agendas." "Unlike people?" "Unlike some people," she corrected, giving him a meaningful look. They spent the next hour walking through the nursery as the rain subsided, Eliza pointing out rare specimens and sharing stories of her work with endangered species conservation. Daniel found himself captivated not just by her knowledge but by her genuine passion. so different from the affected interests he'd grown accustomed to in his professional circle. "I should probably get back to real life," Daniel said reluctantly as they reached the nursery entrance. "I have a client meeting at 2. "Real life," Eliza echoed, glancing around the vibrant greenery surrounding them. "Some might argue this is more real than anything happening in those glass office towers." "Point taken," Daniel conceded with a smile. "Thank you for showing me this place and for being honest about everything." "Even the surveillance photos?" Her expression grew serious again. "Especially those. Disturbing as they are, I needed to know." He paused, gathering courage. "I'd like to see you again, Eliza. Properly. Dinner, maybe?" She studied him, conflict evident in her expression. "Are you sure that's wise?" "Probably not," he admitted. "But I'm tired of making decisions based on what Vanessa might think or do. I've given her enough power over my life." A slow smile spread across Eliza's face. "In that case, I know a great little Italian place downtown. Family-owned, nothing fancy, but the best gnocchi you'll ever taste." "It's a date," Daniel confirmed, feeling lighter than he had in years despite the morning's revelations. As he turned to leave, Eliza called after him. "Daniel, just be prepared. Vanessa won't like this." "I know." He smiled back at her. "I find I don't particularly care." Daniel drove to his office with the windows down, despite the lingering rain. The fresh air cleared his head as he processed everything Eliza had shared. The photos troubled him deeply. The idea that Vanessa had been monitoring him long after their relationship ended suggested a level of obsession he hadn't anticipated. Yet somehow, knowing the truth felt liberating rather than frightening. His phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. His assistant's voice filled the space. "Mr. Matthews, there's a Vanessa Armstrong here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Speak of the devil. "Tell her I'm in meetings all morning. I'll be available after 2. "She says it's urgent, sir. Something about a family emergency." Daniel sighed, recognizing the manipulation tactic. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Have her wait in the conference room, not my office." He changed direction, heading directly to his firm's downtown headquarters. By the time he reached the sleek glass building, his momentary lightness had been replaced by a familiar tension, the one that always accompanied interactions with Vanessa. She was pacing the conference room when he entered, immaculately dressed in a cream designer suit that probably cost more than what most people earned in a month. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Danny, finally," she said, approaching as if to embrace him. Daniel maintained his distance, setting his bag on the conference table between them. "What's the emergency, Vanessa?" She blinked, momentarily thrown by his directness. "It's about Elizabeth. I'm worried about her." "Eliza," he corrected. "She prefers Eliza." "Right. Yes, of course." Vanessa waved dismissively. "Look, I saw you two yesterday, and then Mother mentioned she wasn't answering her phone." She paused, studying his expression. "You've seen her today, haven't you?" "Why are you monitoring her?" Daniel countered, declining to confirm or deny. "Monitoring? What a strange choice of words. I'm concerned as any sister would be." Vanessa perched on the edge of the conference table, crossing her legs elegantly. Eliza, has had some issues in the past. Emotional instability, poor judgment in relationships." Daniel maintained a neutral expression, though anger simmered beneath. "Is that so? She didn't tell you?" Vanessa's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose. "That's concerning. She had a complete breakdown after her divorce 3 years ago. Had to be hospitalized briefly." "Divorce?" This was new information. "Oh." Vanessa's surprise seemed calculated. "I assumed she would have mentioned it." "Yes, she was married briefly to a colleague of her father's. Much older man, quite wealthy. It ended badly. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. He claimed she became obsessed with him, exhibited stalking behaviors. There was a restraining order involved. Daniel's mind raced, trying to reconcile this information with the grounded, straightforward woman he'd come to know. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I care about you both, of course." Vanessa's tone was smooth as silk. "I'd hate to see history repeat itself. Lizzie has a pattern of inserting herself into other people's relationships. It stems from childhood abandonment issues, our therapist said." "Our therapist?" Daniel repeated skeptically. "Family therapy after the divorce was quite revealing." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "The point is, she's vulnerable right now, and you're still healing from us." She placed a manicured hand on his arm. "I'd hate to see either of you hurt because of misplaced feelings." Daniel gently removed her hand. "Your concern is noted. If that's all, I have actual work to attend to." Vanessa's perfect features hardened slightly. "Danny, I know how persuasive my sister can be when she wants something. But ask yourself, of all the men in this city, why did she happen to stop and help you? Why did she agree to meet you? Don't you find the coincidence a bit too convenient?" The seed of doubt she was attempting to plant might once have taken root, but Daniel had spent the morning hearing the truth directly from Eliza. "Actually, I've wondered the same thing. Funny how life works sometimes." Frustration flickered across Vanessa's face before being quickly masked. "Just be careful. When Lizzie becomes fixated on someone, it rarely ends well." She gathered her designer purse, extracting a business card. "My personal number. Call me when you're ready to hear the full story about my sister." Daniel accepted the card automatically. "Goodbye, Vanessa." After she left, he sat in the conference room for several minutes, processing the interaction. Her claims about Eliza's past were troubling, but her delivery had been so calculated, so reminiscent of how she manipulated situations during their relationship, that he found himself doubting every word. His phone buzzed with a text message from Eliza. "Just checking you survived the drive in this rain. Still on for dinner?" Daniel smiled at the simple, straightforward message, so different from Vanessa's theatrical performance of concern. He replied, "Absolutely. Though your sister just paid me an interesting visit, apparently I should be wary of your stalking behaviors and abandonment issues." The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before Eliza's response came through. "I see she's playing her greatest hits. I'd prefer to address this in person rather than text, if you still want dinner, that is." "More than ever," Daniel replied truthfully. "I'd like to hear your side." 3 dots appeared again, then, "Thank you for not immediately believing her. That means more than you know. See you at 7, I'll text the address." Daniel pocketed his phone, troubled by the realization that the sisters' relationship was even more complicated than he'd initially understood. Vanessa's visit had been a deliberate attempt to sabotage whatever was developing between him and Eliza. But why? Was it simply possessiveness over a man she'd discarded years ago, or something deeper? As he headed to his office, his assistant stopped him. "Mr. Matthews, I've been trying to reach you. There's another issue requiring your immediate attention." "What now?" Daniel asked, already mentally exhausted from the morning's events. "It's about the Riverside project. Someone has lodged an environmental complaint that could halt construction. The client is furious." "Who filed the complaint?" Daniel asked, already dreading the answer. His assistant checked her tablet. "A company called Armstrong Holdings, specifically a Richard Armstrong, Vanessa's husband." The coincidence was too precise to be accidental. Clearly, Vanessa's warning had been just the opening salvo in whatever game she was playing. "Get our environmental team on it immediately," Daniel instructed, his resolve hardening, "and clear my schedule for the evening. I have an important dinner to prepare for." Whatever Vanessa was trying to accomplish, He wouldn't let her manipulate him again, not with legal threats, not with insinuations about Eliza's past. This time, he would find out the truth for himself, directly from the source. Trattoria Milano occupied a modest storefront in one of the city's older neighborhoods. No valet parking, no elaborate signage, just a small family-owned establishment with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles repurposed as candle holders. It was precisely the sort of place Vanessa would have deemed beneath her, which made Daniel appreciate it all the more. Eliza waited at a corner table, wearing a simple emerald dress that complemented her amber eyes. She'd left her hair down, chestnut waves falling past her shoulders. Upon seeing him, she offered a smile tinged with apprehension. "I was half expecting you to cancel," she admitted as he sat across from her. "Because of what Vanessa said?" Daniel shook his head. "If anything, her visit convinced me that dinner was even more necessary." An elderly waiter approached, greeting Eliza by name with warm familiarity. After taking their order, Eliza recommended the house Chianti and gnocchi as promised. They were left alone with the elephant Vanessa had placed squarely between them. "I suppose we should address my alleged psychotic breakdown and stalking tendencies," Eliza said dryly, taking a sip of water. "Only if you're comfortable discussing it," Daniel replied. "I didn't entirely believe her, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious." Eliza nodded, her expression growing serious. "There was a grain of truth in what she told you, which is what makes Vanessa's lies so effective." She traced the rim of her water glass. "I was married, briefly, to Dr. Maxwell Kane, my father's research colleague." "The same last name?" "I kept it after the divorce. It was my father's name, after all, and I'd published scientific illustrations under it." Eliza met his gaze directly. Max was 20 years older, brilliant in his field. We married after a whirlwind courtship that, in retrospect, was less about love and more about my naive admiration for his work and his calculated interest in my family connections. Family connections? My father had recently received a substantial grant for his endangered species conservation work. Max, I later discovered, had been rejected for the same funding. Her voice remained steady, but Daniel noticed her fingers tighten around her glass. 6 months into our marriage, I found evidence that he'd been funneling my father's research funds into his own projects, essentially plagiarizing my father's work while stealing the resources meant to support it. The waiter returned with their wine, pouring 2 glasses before discreetly withdrawing. "What did you do?" Daniel asked after taking a fortifying sip. "I confronted him, of course, threatened to expose him." A humorless smile crossed Eliza's face. "Max responded by claiming I was having a mental breakdown. He convinced my mother, who already thought I was fragile like my father, that I needed psychiatric help. When I tried to reach the university ethics board, he had me involuntarily committed for 72 hours. Daniel's stomach tightened with anger on her behalf. "That's horrific." "It was," Eliza agreed. "But it was also clarifying. I realized exactly what I'd married into, not just a manipulative man, but a system that automatically believed a distinguished male professor over his younger, emotionally unstable wife." "How did you get out of it?" Ironically, Vanessa helped. She may not particularly like me, but family reputation matters tremendously to her. The idea of her sister being institutionalized was unacceptable. Bad optics. Eliza's tone was matter of fact. She hired an excellent lawyer who secured my release and negotiated a divorce settlement that included Max's silence regarding my condition. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue the ethics violations. And the restraining order? After the divorce, I did visit Max's laboratory once to retrieve my father's original research notebooks, which had tremendous sentimental value. Max called campus security, claimed I was harassing him. Her expression darkened. The restraining order was temporary, dismissed once the divorce was finalized, but the story had already spread in certain circles. Daniel absorbed this information, increasingly disturbed by how easily a woman's reputation and freedom could be manipulated by those with power. I'm sorry you went through that. It was 3 years ago, Eliza said with quiet dignity. I've rebuilt my life, my career, my sense of self. But Vanessa's version, that I had a psychotic break and stalked my poor, innocent ex-husband, remains her preferred narrative. Why would she perpetuate that story? She helped you. Because it reinforces her self-image as the stable sister who rescues the fragile one, and because the truth that she helped bury legitimate ethics violations to protect family reputation doesn't cast her in such a flattering light. Eliza sipped her wine. In Vanessa's world, appearance always trumps reality. Their food arrived, steaming plates of handmade gnocchi in a delicate sage butter sauce. Daniel took a bite, the pillowy texture and rich flavor momentarily distracting him from the troubling conversation. "This is incredible," he said, genuinely impressed. "Told you." Eliza smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Nonna Milano makes them fresh every morning. No fancy restaurant in the city can compare." They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Daniel spoke again. "There's something else you should know. After Vanessa visited my office, her husband filed an environmental complaint against my firm's biggest current project." Eliza lowered her fork. "That's not a coincidence." "No, it's not. She's sending a clear message." Daniel met her gaze. "The question is, why now? Why does she suddenly care who I spend time with after 3 years of silence?" "Control," Eliza answered without hesitation. "Vanessa collects people like trophies. Even those she discards remain her possessions in her mind. The idea that you might form a connection with me, her lesser sister, threatens that ownership. That seems pathological. Our mother was the same way. Beautiful, charismatic women who expect adoration as their birthright." Eliza's expression softened. "I'm not telling you this to disparage them. It's a learned behavior, passed down through generations of women raised to believe their value lies in their ability to captivate and control men." Daniel considered this perspective. "And you escaped this pattern how?" "By being raised primarily by my father after age 7, Eliza replied. "He valued curiosity, integrity, and genuine connection with the natural world. Different lessons entirely." The realization that had been forming throughout their conversations solidified in Daniel's mind. "You're nothing like them." Eliza smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." As they finished their meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Daniel's passion for sustainable architecture, Eliza's upcoming exhibition of botanical illustrations, shared opinions on books and films. The chemistry between them was undeniable, a natural ease that made hours pass like minutes. Over tiramisu and espresso, Daniel broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "So where does this leave us, whatever this is?" "Complicated," Eliza admitted. "My sister has demonstrated she's willing to target your professional reputation just for having dinner with me. It will only escalate if we continue seeing each other." "I can handle Vanessa," Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. "The environmental complaint is baseless. We've adhered to every regulation. It's merely a delay tactic." "It's not just that." Eliza set down her espresso cup. "Daniel, I like you, more than I expected to. But I've spent 3 years rebuilding my life after being manipulated and controlled. I need to be very careful about what and who I allow into it." "I understand that," Daniel said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And I respect it. But I also think there's something here worth exploring despite the complications." Eliza didn't pull away. "There is. That's what makes this difficult." "Let me ask you something," Daniel said, an idea forming. "What would you do if Vanessa wasn't a factor? If she was just some ex of mine with no connection to you?" Eliza considered the question. "I'd probably be less cautious, more willing to see where this might lead." "Then let's try that approach," Daniel suggested. Not ignoring the reality, but not giving Vanessa more power than she deserves either. We take this one day at a time, get to know each other without the shadow of the past dictating our choices. That's easier said than done. Most worthwhile things are. He squeezed her hand gently. I spent 3 years letting Vanessa's rejection define me. I don't want to give her the power to prevent something promising before it even begins. A slow smile spread across Eliza's face. When did you get so wise, architect? Probably around the time a woman in a yellow raincoat showed me my car jack was in the wrong place, he replied with a grin. Outside the restaurant, the night air carried the scent of impending rain. Daniel walked Eliza to her truck, parked half a block away. I had a wonderful time, she said, turning to face him, despite the heavy conversation. So did I, Daniel replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Can I see you again? Yes, she answered simply. Though we should probably be strategic about where and when, at least until the dust settles with Vanessa. Daniel nodded, though he disliked the idea of hiding. I suppose that's prudent. Prudent, Eliza echoed with a small laugh. Now there's a word Vanessa would never associate with me. Her loss, Daniel said softly. In the gentle glow of the streetlight, Eliza's face was partially shadowed, her eyes luminous. Daniel felt drawn to her not just physically but on a deeper level, a recognition of something authentic and rare. Without overthinking, he leaned forward and kissed her. The connection was immediate and electric. Eliza's initial surprise melted into response, her hand finding his jacket lapel as she leaned into the kiss. It was both tender and charged with possibility, over too quickly, yet somehow perfectly timed. When they separated, Eliza's expression held wonder and a hint of concern. That complicates things further. In the best possible way, Daniel replied, feeling more alive than he had in years. A flash caught his attention, a brief, bright light from a car parked across the street. Before he could process what he'd seen, the vehicle's engine started and it pulled away from the curb. Did you see that? He asked, suddenly alert. Eliza nodded, her expression growing serious. Someone was watching us. Vanessa? Or someone working for her? Eliza extracted her keys from her purse, her movements tense. I should go. This just got more dangerous than a simple kiss warrants. Daniel wanted to protest, to insist they not let intrusion dictate their actions, but the worry in Eliza's eyes stopped him. I'll call you tomorrow. She nodded, climbing into her truck. Through the open window, she added, Be careful driving home, and check your project files tomorrow. If Vanessa saw that kiss, your environmental complaint may be the least of your problems. As Daniel watched her drive away, the momentary joy of their connection was overshadowed by unease. He hadn't seen the face of their observer, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The kiss had crossed some invisible line, transforming their connection from a potential threat to an actual one in Vanessa's eyes. The game had escalated, and Daniel could only guess what the next move might be. The Riverside project had been Daniel's passion for over a year, a sustainable mixed-use development designed to revitalize an abandoned industrial area while preserving the natural ecosystem of the adjacent waterfront. The environmental complaint filed by Richard Armstrong was just the beginning. By morning, Daniel faced a full-blown crisis. The investors are getting nervous, Marcus, his business partner, explained as they stood surveying the architectural model in their conference room. Armstrong Holdings has significant influence with the zoning board. They're suggesting our environmental impact studies were inadequate. They're not just suggesting it, Daniel's legal counsel interjected, sliding a document across the table. They've filed a formal request for injunction pending additional assessments. Construction will be halted for at least 60 days. Daniel examined the paperwork, noting Richard Armstrong's signature at the bottom. This isn't about environmental concerns, it's personal. Care to elaborate? Marcus asked, eyebrows raised. Before Daniel could respond, his assistant entered with a coffee tray. "Mr. Matthews, these just arrived for you." She handed him an envelope that had been delivered by courier. Inside was a single photograph, Daniel and Eliza kissing outside Trattoria Milano the previous night. Scrawled across the bottom in elegant handwriting, "Poor judgment as always. Call me before this gets worse. V." "Everything all right?" Marcus asked, noting Daniel's expression. "Just an old acquaintance with boundary issues," Daniel replied, tucking the photo into his pocket. "I need to make a call." In his private office, Daniel stared at his phone, anger and frustration building. He'd spent years recovering from Vanessa's abandonment, rebuilding his confidence and career. Now she was threatening everything he'd worked for simply because he'd connected with her sister. Instead of calling Vanessa, he dialed Eliza. "It's already happening," he said when she answered. "Richard filed for an injunction on the Riverside project, and Vanessa sent me a photo of us from last night with a thinly veiled threat." Eliza's sigh carried through the phone. "I'm sorry, Daniel. This is exactly what I was worried about." "Don't apologize for your sister's behavior," Daniel said firmly. "She's a grown woman making calculated choices, not a force of nature we're helpless against." "You're right." The determination in Eliza's voice matched his own. "What are you going to do?" "First, I'm not calling Vanessa, which is what she wants. Second, I'm having our legal team prepare a response to the injunction. And third," he paused, "I'd like to see you again. Soon." "Is that wise, given the circumstances?" "Probably not," Daniel admitted. "But I refuse to let Vanessa dictate my personal life." Again. A moment of silence passed before Eliza responded. "I have to give a talk at the Botanical Garden tomorrow evening, a presentation on endangered plant species I've illustrated. It's a small event, mostly academics and environmental supporters. You could attend as a potential donor interested in conservation architecture." "I'd like that." The idea of seeing Eliza in her professional element appealed to him. "Text me the details." After hanging up, Daniel summoned his legal team to develop a strategy for countering the injunction. They were deep in discussion when Marcus knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," he said, expression troubled. "Richard Armstrong." Daniel steeled himself. "Show him in." Richard Armstrong was precisely what Daniel expected. Tall, distinguished, old money wrapped in a custom suit. The type of man Vanessa had always been drawn to, representing the wealth and status she craved. "Matthews," Richard greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Daniel replied coolly. "Just reviewing the baseless injunction your company filed against my project." Richard settled uninvited into a chair, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "Yes, unfortunate business. Environmental regulations are so complex these days." His tone suggested boredom rather than concern. "But I'm not here to discuss the Riverside project. I'm here about my wife. Vanessa and I have nothing to discuss." "On the contrary." Richard's smile tightened. "You've been spending time with her unstable sister, causing Vanessa considerable distress. Family loyalty is important to the Armstrongs." "Eliza is hardly unstable," Daniel countered. "And my personal life is none of Vanessa's concern." Richard's expression hardened. "Everything that affects my wife's well-being is my concern. Elizabeth's history of fixating on inappropriate men is well documented. First her professor husband, now her sister's former fiancé." He sighed dramatically. The psychological evaluation after her hospitalization was quite illuminating. Daniel fought to maintain his composure. Is there a point to this visit beyond character assassination? Merely friendly advice. Richard stood, straightening his already immaculate suit. "The injunction on your project could be resolved quickly with the right approach. Vanessa suggested that distancing yourself from Elizabeth might create a more favorable climate for negotiation." "Are you actually threatening my business because of who I choose to have dinner with?" Daniel asked incredulously. "Threatening? No." Richard's smile returned, all teeth and no warmth, simply outlining cause and effect. Vanessa wanted to offer you a chance to reconsider your recent choices before things become more complicated. He placed a business card on Daniel's desk. Call when you're ready to discuss terms. Good day, Matthews. After Richard left, Daniel remained at his desk, processing the blatant attempt at coercion. His phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Everything okay? Getting worried? He texted back. Just had a visit from Richard. He and Vanessa are escalating. We'll call you later with details. The magnitude of the situation was becoming clear. This wasn't just jealousy or possessiveness. Vanessa and Richard were prepared to systematically dismantle his professional reputation unless he complied with their demands. Daniel spent the afternoon with his legal team, reviewing every aspect of the Riverside project's environmental compliance. As he suspected, their studies were comprehensive and exceeded regulatory requirements. The injunction was purely tactical, designed to create delays and investor uncertainty. By evening, he'd developed a two-pronged strategy: aggressive legal defense of the project combined with outreach to his network of environmental advocates who could publicly support the development's green credentials. As he drove home, exhaustion settling into his bones, Daniel reflected on how quickly his life had been upended. 4 days ago, he'd been a man with a flat tire on a rainy road. Now he was caught in a power struggle with his ex-fiancée and her influential husband, while developing feelings for a woman whose authenticity and strength increasingly captivated him. His phone rang through the car's speaker system. Eliza. I just heard from Jim at the nursery, she said without preamble. He received a call from a law firm representing Armstrong Holdings, expressing concerns about our rare plant importation licenses. They're threatening an audit that could shut down our endangered species program. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. They're targeting you too now. It gets worse. The Botanical Garden called to postpone my presentation tomorrow. Apparently, a major donor expressed concerns about my qualifications. Her voice remained steady despite the clear anger underneath. They didn't name the donor, but Richard and Vanessa, Daniel finished. This isn't just about you and me anymore, Eliza continued. They're going after my work, my professional standing. The conservation program at Finnegan's supports researchers worldwide. If our import licenses are suspended, endangered plants in transit could die. The calculated cruelty of the move didn't surprise Daniel, but it fueled his growing anger. This has gone too far. I agree. Determination strengthened Eliza's voice. I've spent my life avoiding confrontation with Vanessa. Taking the path of least resistance seemed easier than challenging her, but I can't stand by while she threatens work that actually matters. What are you suggesting? I'm tired of hiding, Daniel, of accommodating Vanessa's delusions and manipulations. If she wants war, I'm finally ready to fight back. Daniel pulled into his driveway, heart pounding with a mixture of concern and admiration for Eliza's resolve. Come over. We need to talk about this in person. 30 minutes later, Eliza arrived at his townhouse. Standing on his doorstep in jeans and a simple blue sweater, determination etched into her features, she looked both vulnerable and formidable. Daniel led her to his living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. As an architect, he'd designed the space to balance aesthetics and functionality, clean lines, natural materials, and strategic lighting, creating an atmosphere of calm strength. Nice place, Eliza commented, taking in the surroundings. It suits you. Thank you, Daniel replied, pouring them each a glass of wine. I designed most of it myself during the renovation. It was therapeutic after Vanessa left. Creating something beautiful from something broken, Eliza mused, accepting the glass. That seems to be a pattern with you. The Riverside project was conceived the same way, Daniel admitted, transforming abandoned industrial wasteland into sustainable community space. Maybe I'm too attached to the redemption narrative. Or maybe you see potential where others see only damage. Eliza's gaze held his. "That's a gift, Daniel." They settled on the couch, close enough to feel the energy between them, yet maintaining a small distance that acknowledged the seriousness of their situation. "Tell me about the conservation program," Daniel prompted. "Why is it so important?" As Eliza described the work of identifying, documenting, and preserving endangered plant species, her passion illuminated her from within. The program she helped run at Finnegan's Nursery collaborated with international botanists to create living repositories of plants threatened by climate change and habitat destruction. "These plants aren't just beautiful," she explained, gesturing with expressive hands. "They're potential sources of medicine, climate solutions, and ecological balance. Once they're gone, we lose all of that potential forever." Daniel listened, increasingly troubled by Vanessa's willingness to threaten such vital work simply to maintain control. "We need a plan," he said when Eliza finished. "Something beyond legal defensive measures." "I've been thinking about that," Eliza replied, setting down her wine glass. "Vanessa's power comes from perception, the carefully constructed image she projects to the world. What if we challenge that narrative directly?" "What do you have in mind?" "The truth." Eliza's amber eyes held steady conviction. "Not as weapons or accusations, but simply as facts presented without apology. About her abandonment of your engagement, about her manipulation of my divorce situation, about her and Richard's current attempts at coercion." Daniel considered this approach. "The truth as sunlight on shadows." "Exactly," Eliza nodded. "Vanessa thrives in environments she can control through selective information and constructed narratives. Full transparency disrupts that control." "It's risky," Daniel cautioned. "The Armstrongs have significant social and financial influence." "So do you," Eliza countered. "And unlike them, you've built your reputation on actual accomplishment rather than strategic alliances. People respect that. Especially in the environmental community you'll need to support Riverside." As they discussed potential approaches, Daniel was struck by Eliza's strategic thinking. She wasn't just reacting emotionally to her sister's attacks. She was analyzing vulnerabilities and leverage points with remarkable clarity. "You know," he said during a pause in their planning, "for someone who claims to avoid confrontation with Vanessa, you've developed quite a tactical mind." A small smile touched Eliza's lips. "Growing up with Vanessa and my mother was an education in psychological warfare. I observed more than participated, but I learned the patterns." They moved to Daniel's dining table, spreading out papers and laptops as they developed their strategy. The plan that emerged was multifaceted: legal defense of both the Riverside Project and Finnegan's import licenses, outreach to environmental advocates and media contacts, and a carefully crafted public narrative that highlighted the positive contributions of their respective work while subtly exposing the Armstrongs' tactics. Hours passed in focused collaboration, their shared purpose creating an intimacy beyond physical attraction. When they finally paused, it was past midnight, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. "We should get some rest," Daniel said, noticing the fatigue in Eliza's eyes despite her determined expression. She nodded, gathering her notes. "Tomorrow will be challenging. Richard and Vanessa won't take this lying down." "No," Daniel agreed, walking her to the door. "But neither will we." In the doorway, Eliza turned to face him. The vulnerability she'd carefully controlled all evening finally showed through. "Are you sure about this, Daniel? Once we start, there's no going back. Vanessa will use everything she has against us, and she fights dirty." Daniel took her hands in his. "I've spent 3 years avoiding anything that might remind me of Vanessa. In the process, I almost missed finding someone extraordinary." He smiled gently. "Some things are worth fighting for." Eliza rose on tiptoes and kissed him, a brief, tender connection that held promise beyond the battle ahead. "Get some sleep, architect. Tomorrow we build something new." As he watched her drive away, Daniel felt a curious lightness despite the looming conflict. For the first time since Vanessa had walked out of his life, he wasn't defined by that abandonment. Instead, he was choosing to stand for something, and someone, that mattered. Morning arrived with the chime of Daniel's phone. A text from Eliza containing a link to one of the city's prominent business news sites. The headline made his stomach drop. Armstrong Holdings questions environmental ethics of Matthews architecture firm. The accompanying photo showed Richard Armstrong looking appropriately concerned at what appeared to be a press breakfast. Daniel quickly scanned the article. Richard had masterfully implied serious environmental violations without making specific accusations that could be refuted. The piece mentioned the injunction as if it were a routine regulatory matter rather than a targeted attack, positioning Armstrong Holdings as a champion of environmental responsibility. A second text from Eliza followed. "They've fired the first public shot. Time to execute our plan. Meeting still on for 9?" Daniel confirmed and showered quickly, mentally reviewing their strategy. By 8:30, he was at his office, preparing for the impromptu press conference they'd decided to hold regarding the Riverside project. His PR team had worked through the night, contacting environmental journalists and community advocates who could speak to the project's sustainability credentials. At 8:45, his assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Matthews, there's an Eliza Kane here to see you." "Send her in," Daniel replied, standing to greet her. Eliza entered wearing a professional emerald blazer over a cream blouse, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. The transformation from the casual woman he'd first met on the roadside to this polished professional was striking, yet the authenticity in her eyes remained unchanged. "Ready for this?" she asked, setting her portfolio on his desk. "As ready as possible." He gestured to the article on his computer screen. "Richard moves fast. Always has." Eliza opened her portfolio, revealing meticulous botanical illustrations of riverside plants native to the area. "I brought these for the press conference. Visual evidence of how your project is actually preserving native species rather than threatening them." Daniel examined the drawings. Exquisitely detailed renderings of plants that were incorporated into the Riverside project's landscaping plan. "These are incredible. But are you sure you want to be publicly associated with me? Vanessa will see it as a direct challenge." "That's precisely why I'm doing it." Determination flashed in Eliza's eyes. "I'm tired of arranging my life to avoid triggering Vanessa's insecurities. Besides," she added with a grim smile, "she's already targeting my work. There's nothing to lose by standing my ground." As they reviewed their presentation points, Daniel's legal counsel arrived with news. The Environmental Review Board has agreed to an expedited hearing regarding the injunction. They were impressed by the support letters from conservation groups. "Good," Daniel nodded. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." The lawyer glanced between Daniel and Eliza. "I should warn you both. Richard Armstrong is on the board of directors for several companies with considerable influence in this city. This won't be just a technical evaluation of environmental compliance." "We know," Eliza replied, "which is why we're changing the narrative today." The press conference was held in the lobby of Daniel's firm, where a scale model of the Riverside project was prominently displayed. By 9:30, the space was filled with journalists, environmental advocates, and community representatives. Daniel recognized several reporters from publications that typically covered Richard Armstrong's business ventures. Standing before the assembled crowd, Daniel felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. Public speaking had never been his favorite aspect of professional life, but Eliza's presence beside him provided unexpected steadiness. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "I'd like to address the environmental concerns recently raised about the Riverside project. Rather than speaking defensively, I want to use this opportunity to highlight what makes this development uniquely beneficial to both our community and our local ecosystem." For the next 15 minutes, Daniel outlined the project's sustainable features, from energy-efficient buildings and rainwater recycling systems to the preservation of natural watershed functions and native habitat areas. He emphasized how the development was reclaiming brownfield industrial land that was currently leaching pollutants into the river. "We're not just building structures," he explained, gesturing to the model. "We're restoring a damaged ecosystem while creating spaces for people to live and work in harmony with the natural environment." When he finished, Daniel introduced Eliza. To speak about the botanical conservation aspects of the project, I've invited Eliza Kane, a scientific illustrator specializing in endangered plant species and conservation. Eliza stepped forward with quiet confidence, displaying her illustrations and explaining how the project incorporated restoration of native plant communities that had been destroyed by previous industrial use. "The irony," she noted with pointed clarity, "is that the current injunction is actually preventing us from implementing the very environmental protections that would benefit the riverside ecosystem." As she spoke, Daniel watched the journalists' reactions. Several were taking detailed notes, clearly recognizing the substantive nature of her expertise. This wasn't just a PR exercise. Eliza brought legitimate scientific perspective to the conversation. When they opened the floor for questions, the first came from a reporter Daniel recognized from the business journal that had published Richard's accusations. "Ms. Kane, isn't it true that you're the sister of Vanessa Armstrong, whose husband filed the injunction against this project? How can the public trust your assessment isn't influenced by personal relationships?" Eliza didn't flinch. "I'm a professional botanical illustrator with degrees in both fine arts and biological sciences. My work has been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals and is displayed in natural history museums. My family connections are irrelevant to my expertise." She smiled pleasantly. "Though if we're discussing potential conflicts of interest, perhaps the same question should be asked of Mr. Armstrong, whose holdings include several competing development companies." A murmur spread through the assembled journalists. This angle, the possibility that Richard's environmental concerns masked business competition, hadn't been publicly raised before. The questions continued, increasingly substantive. By the time the press conference concluded, Daniel felt confident they'd successfully redirected the conversation from vague accusations to concrete environmental benefits. Several prominent environmental bloggers had already tweeted support for the project, sharing Eliza's illustrations of the restoration plans. "That went better than I expected," Daniel told Eliza as they retreated to his office afterward. "The tide's turning," she agreed. "But this is just the beginning. Vanessa and Richard won't back down easily." As if summoned by her words, Daniel's phone rang, his assistant sounding uncharacteristically flustered. "Mr. Matthews, Mrs. Armstrong is here. She's quite insistent on seeing you immediately." Daniel exchanged a glance with Eliza. "Send her in." Moments later, Vanessa burst through the door, impeccably dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Eliza, her perfectly composed facade cracking slightly. "Elizabeth, what a surprise to find you here." Her tone dripped with false sweetness. "Expanding into architecture now? How versatile of you." "Hello, Vanessa," Eliza replied calmly. "I was just consulting on the native plant restoration for the Riverside project." Vanessa's gaze shifted to Daniel, hardening significantly. "I saw your little performance downstairs. Quite the show of unity, though I'm not sure dragging my unstable sister into your business disputes reflects well on your judgment, Danny." "I didn't drag Eliza anywhere," Daniel responded evenly. "She's a respected scientific illustrator whose expertise is directly relevant to the project." "Of course she is." Vanessa's laugh held no humor. "And I'm sure her involvement has nothing to do with your apparent infatuation with her. Richard warned me you might be this reckless." "Why are you here, Vanessa?" Daniel asked, refusing to be baited. She settled uninvited into a chair, crossing her legs elegantly. "To offer you one last chance to be reasonable. Drop this public relations campaign against the injunction, distance yourself from my sister, and Richard will consider withdrawing his environmental concerns." "So it is a shakedown," Daniel noted. Not actual environmental advocacy. Call it whatever you like. Vanessa examined her manicured nails. The outcome remains the same. Your project stays stalled until you comply with our reasonable requests. Eliza, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Why are you doing this, Vanessa? Daniel has moved on with his life. Why can't you just let him be? Let him be? Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. Like you let Max be after your divorce? We both know how that ended, with restraining orders and psychiatric holds. That's enough, Daniel interjected sharply. We know the truth about Eliza's marriage and divorce. Your version of events doesn't hold water anymore. Something dangerous flashed in Vanessa's eyes. You always were too trusting, Danny. Elizabeth has always been pathologically envious of me, my relationships, my success, my stability. First, she tried to undermine my engagement to you with her unsolicited advice, and now she's manipulated her way into your life when she saw an opportunity. That's not what happened, Eliza said, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. I never tried to undermine your engagement. I told you to be honest with Daniel instead of disappearing on him. Semantics, Vanessa waved dismissively. The point is, she's using you, Daniel, to get back at me, to prove she can take something I once valued. She leaned forward, her voice softening. We had something special once. Don't let Elizabeth's manipulation ruin your career and reputation. Daniel studied his ex-fiancée, seeing with clarity the manipulation techniques that had once seemed like passionate conviction. Vanessa, I think you should leave. Excuse me? Genuine surprise crossed her perfect features. You heard me. Daniel stood, indicating the conversation was over. Your attempts to control my personal and professional life are unwelcome. If Richard has legitimate environmental concerns, we'll address them through proper regulatory channels. Otherwise, I have work to do. Vanessa rose slowly, gathering her composure. You'll regret this, Daniel. Both of you will. Her gaze shifted between them, calculating. Family loyalty used to mean something, Elizabeth. Mother will be devastated to learn how you've betrayed that trust. Mother will believe whatever narrative you feed her, Eliza replied calmly. She always has, but that doesn't make it true. With a final glacial stare, Vanessa strode out of the office, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering after her departure. Eliza released a breath she'd been holding. Well, that went about as expected. You were amazing, Daniel said sincerely. I've never seen anyone stand up to her so calmly. Years of practice, Eliza replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Though I meant what I said about our mother, Vanessa will certainly convince her that I'm the villain in this story. Daniel moved closer, taking her hand. Does that bother you? Eliza considered the question. Less than it once would have. I've spent too many years seeking approval from people incapable of giving it genuinely. She squeezed his hand. But Vanessa's parting shot wasn't just emotional manipulation. She and Richard will escalate now. Let them, Daniel said with more confidence than he truly felt. We've started shifting the narrative. The Environmental Review Board will have a harder time ruling against us with public support growing. His phone buzzed with a news alert. The Business Journal had already published an update on the Riverside Project controversy, including quotes from the press conference and mentioning the potential competitive interests behind Armstrong Holdings' injunction request. See? Daniel showed her the article. The truth is already working. Eliza nodded, though concern still shadowed her expression. It's a good start, but Vanessa doesn't give up easily when her image is at stake. And now it's not just your project she's attacking, it's her narrative about me, about you, about her own actions 3 years ago. Then we keep telling the truth, Daniel said simply. Not as weapons, but as facts, just like you suggested. Looking at their joined hands, Eliza's expression softened. Thank you for standing up for me with Vanessa. Not many people have done that. You stood up for yourself beautifully, Daniel corrected. "I just backed you up." Their eyes met, an understanding passing between them that transcended the immediate crisis. Whatever happened with the project, with Vanessa and Richard, with the public narrative, they had found in each other something genuine and valuable. Daniel's assistant interrupted with a knock. "Mr. Matthews, your environmental team is ready for the board hearing preparation session." "I should go," Eliza said, gathering her portfolio. "You have work to do, and I need to check on the nursery. Jim texted that inspectors showed up this morning, almost certainly Richard's doing." "Dinner tonight?" Daniel asked. "To strategize for tomorrow's hearing?" Eliza smiled, this time genuinely. "To strategize. Right." After she left, Daniel found himself standing at his office window, watching her cross the plaza below. In just a few days, this woman had awakened something in him he'd thought Vanessa had permanently damaged. The capacity to trust, to hope, to fight for something that mattered. Whatever Vanessa and Richard threw at them next, he would face it with a clarity and purpose that had been missing from his life for too long. The Environmental Review Board hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the sterile confines of a government building downtown. Daniel arrived early with his legal team, reviewing their presentation one final time. The hallway outside the hearing room buzzed with conversations. Environmental activists, developers, journalists, and curious citizens all gathered for what had become the most talked-about development controversy in recent memory. Daniel spotted Richard Armstrong across the lobby, surrounded by attorneys in expensive suits. Their eyes met briefly, Richard's lips curving into a smug smile that suggested confidence in the outcome. Standing slightly apart from Richard's entourage was Vanessa, elegant in a conservative navy dress that projected respectability and concern. She was speaking earnestly to a woman Daniel recognized as the board chairperson, gesturing with perfectly manicured hands. "She's working the room," noted Marcus, who had joined Daniel for moral support. "Vanessa always excelled at that." "It won't matter," Daniel replied, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "The science and compliance documentation are on our side." His phone vibrated with a text from Eliza. "Inspectors still at the nursery. Can't leave. Tell the truth, architect. I'm with you in spirit." A flicker of disappointment crossed Daniel's face. He'd hoped Eliza would be present, both for emotional support and to counter any botanical claims Richard's team might make. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "Fine," Daniel replied, pocketing his phone. "Let's focus on the facts." The hearing room was arranged like a small courtroom, with the 7-member review board seated at an elevated table. The audience section had filled quickly, with Richard's team occupying the front row on one side and Daniel's on the other. Vanessa slipped in just before proceedings began, taking a seat directly behind her husband. "This hearing is to review the environmental compliance of the Riverside project," announced the chairperson, a stern-looking woman in her 60s. "Armstrong Holdings has filed concerns regarding potential watershed impact and endangered species protection. Matthews Architecture will have the opportunity to address these concerns before the board renders a decision." Richard's legal team presented first, outlining what they characterized as significant oversights in the project's environmental impact studies. Their environmental consultant, a man with impressive credentials but little actual experience in urban watershed management, presented theoretical models suggesting potential runoff issues. "The Riverside area contains several plant species of concern," the consultant continued, displaying slides of native vegetation. "The current development plan fails to adequately protect these vulnerable populations." Daniel recognized the plants from Eliza's illustrations, the same species they had specifically designed the project to preserve and enhance. The misrepresentation was so blatant, he had to resist the urge to interrupt. When Daniel's team finally had their turn, they methodically dismantled each accusation with documented evidence. Their lead attorney presented the comprehensive environmental studies, certified by multiple independent experts. Daniel himself walked the board through the project's design elements that specifically addressed watershed protection and habitat preservation. Furthermore, Daniel concluded, "We've partnered with conservation experts to not only preserve existing plant communities but to restore areas damaged by previous industrial use." He displayed Eliza's detailed illustrations, explaining how each species would be protected during construction and enhanced afterward. The board members appeared engaged, asking substantive questions that suggested they were taking the matter seriously, despite whatever influence Richard might have. As the technical portion of the hearing concluded, the chairperson opened the floor for public comments. "Before we hear from the public," Richard interjected smoothly, rising from his seat, "I'd like to address a matter of professional concern." The chairperson frowned slightly. "Mr. Armstrong, this isn't the standard procedure." "I understand, Madam Chairperson, but this relates directly to the credibility of the evidence presented." Richard's tone conveyed respectful insistence. "It has come to my attention that Mr. Matthews has a personal relationship with one of his supposed independent experts, the botanical illustrator whose work he's presenting as scientific evidence." Murmurs rippled through the audience as Richard continued, "While Ms. Kane's artistic skills are not in question, her objectivity certainly is. Not only is she romantically involved with Mr. Matthews, creating an obvious conflict of interest, but she has a documented history of emotional instability that calls her professional judgment into question." Daniel's attorney stood immediately. "Objection! This is completely inappropriate and irrelevant to the environmental review." "I have to agree," the chairperson stated firmly. "Mr. Armstrong, please limit your comments to the environmental concerns at hand." "With all due respect," Richard persisted, "if the board is basing decisions on potentially compromised evidence, that is very much relevant. The public deserves transparency about who is providing expert testimony and what factors might influence their assessments." Before the chairperson could respond, the hearing room door opened. Eliza walked in, calm determination in every step. She wore the same professional attire from yesterday's press conference, her portfolio tucked under her arm. "Since my professional qualifications are being questioned," she announced clearly, "I believe I should address the board directly." A hush fell over the room as Eliza made her way to the front. Daniel hadn't expected her. The nursery inspectors had seemed deliberately timed to prevent her attendance, but her presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. There was something undeniably authoritative about her quiet confidence. "My name is Eliza Kane," she began, facing the board. "I hold degrees in botanical science and fine arts from Cornell University. My scientific illustrations have been published in the Journal of Botanical Conservation, Natural History magazine, and several peer-reviewed academic publications." She opened her portfolio, displaying credentials and publication examples. "The illustrations presented by Mr. Matthews accurately represent the plant species present at the Riverside site and the conservation approaches incorporated into the project design. Every detail is scientifically accurate and verified by field studies I personally conducted." She turned slightly to face Richard. "As for the suggestion that my work is compromised by personal relationships, I would note that scientific accuracy can be objectively verified regardless of who created the illustrations. The board is welcome to consult any qualified botanist to confirm my findings. And regarding my supposed emotional instability," she continued without flinching, "I believe Mr. Armstrong is referring to events surrounding my divorce 3 years ago, which have no bearing on my professional qualifications or the scientific accuracy of my work." The chairperson studied Eliza thoughtfully. "Ms. Kane, are you currently employed in your field?" "Yes, Madam Chairperson. I work as the rare species consultant for Finnegan's Nursery and Botanical Preservation, managing their endangered plant conservation program. I also serve as a scientific illustrator for multiple universities and research publications." "And your illustrations for the Riverside project, were they commissioned specifically for this development?" "No," Eliza replied. "They were created 2 years ago as part of a watershed mapping project for the Natural Resources Department long before I ever met Mr. Matthews. He incorporated my existing research into his design after discovering our work through public records. This revelation, which Daniel had not known, effectively neutralized Richard's conflict of interest accusation. The board members exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. "Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Kane," the chairperson said. "Mr. Armstrong, unless you have substantive environmental concerns to present, I believe we can proceed to public comments." Richard's expression had darkened, but he maintained his composure. "Of course, Madam Chairperson." The remainder of the hearing proceeded more smoothly, with several environmental advocates speaking in support of the Riverside Project's conservation approach. When the board finally adjourned to deliberate, Daniel approached Eliza, who stood apart from the dispersing crowd. "That was unexpected," he said quietly. "I thought you couldn't leave the nursery." Jim convinced the inspectors to focus on areas that didn't require my presence. A small smile touched her lips. I wasn't going to let Richard's accusations go unanswered. "The pre-existing illustrations, why didn't you tell me?" "It never came up," Eliza replied. "When you showed me your project plans yesterday and I recognized the area, I realized you had incorporated conservation approaches based on my watershed mapping project. It was a surprising coincidence." "Another one," Daniel mused. "We seem to have quite a few of those." Before Eliza could respond, Vanessa approached, her expression tightly controlled. "Quite a performance, Elizabeth. Mother would be proud of your theatrical timing." "It wasn't a performance, Vanessa," Eliza replied evenly. "Just the truth." "The truth," Vanessa echoed with a bitter laugh. "Your version of it anyway." She turned to Daniel. "I warned you about her manipulation tactics. This won't end well for either of you." Daniel stepped closer to Eliza, a gesture of solidarity that wasn't lost on Vanessa. "The board will make their decision based on environmental facts, not personal vendettas." Vanessa's perfectly composed mask slipped momentarily, revealing something raw beneath, hurt, perhaps, or jealousy. "This isn't just about the project anymore. You've made it personal by choosing her." "No, Vanessa," Daniel countered gently. "You made it personal when you targeted my work because I had coffee with your sister." Richard approached, placing a possessive hand on Vanessa's shoulder. "The board is taking longer than expected," he observed with forced casualness. "Interesting." "Deliberation is appropriate for complex decisions," Eliza noted. "Indeed." Richard's smile was cold. Though sometimes decisions have unexpected consequences, he directed his gaze to Daniel. "Your investor group seemed quite concerned when I spoke with them this morning. Charles Westfield was particularly receptive to alternative opportunities Armstrong Holdings might offer." Daniel felt a chill. Charles Westfield was his largest investor, whose support was crucial for the project's financing. "You approached my investors directly?" "Merely a courtesy conversation between business associates," Richard replied smoothly, "though I did suggest they might want to review their exposure to potentially delayed projects." Before Daniel could respond, the hearing room doors opened. The board had reached a decision. Everyone filed back into the room, tension thick in the air. Daniel and Eliza sat together while Richard and Vanessa took their places in the front row across the aisle. The chairperson called the hearing back to order. After reviewing the evidence presented, the board has determined that the Riverside Project meets all environmental requirements as currently designed. Relief flooded through Daniel as she continued. "The injunction is lifted, contingent upon implementation of the conservation measures outlined in the presentation." Richard's expression darkened visibly, but he maintained his composure. Vanessa, however, seemed unable to contain her reaction, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the armrest of her chair. "Additionally," the chairperson added, "the board commends Matthews Architecture for their innovative approach to urban watershed management and native species preservation. This project sets a positive precedent for sustainable development in our city." Outside the hearing room, reporters gathered around Daniel for statements. As he fielded questions about the project's timeline and conservation features, he caught sight of Richard and Vanessa in intense conversation with a man he recognized as Charles Westfield, his key investor. "Excuse me," he said to the journalists. "I need to address something important." He approached the trio, Eliza following discreetly behind. Charles Westfield, a distinguished man in his 60s with a reputation for shrewd business decisions, looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Charles," Daniel greeted him, "I see you've met the Armstrongs." "Daniel," Westfield replied stiffly. "Yes, Richard was just explaining some concerns about project financing moving forward." "Despite the board's decision," Richard interjected smoothly, "certain investment risks remain. I was simply offering Mr. Westfield some alternative opportunities with more predictable returns." The implication was clear. Richard was attempting to sabotage the project's funding, even after losing the regulatory battle. Before Daniel could respond, Eliza stepped forward. "Mr. Westfield," she said, extending her hand. "Eliza Kane. My conservation team has worked extensively on the Riverside Habitat Assessment. The project's environmental innovations have already attracted significant interest from sustainable development funds." Westfield shook her hand, appearing intrigued. "Is that so?" "In fact," Eliza continued confidently, "the Natural Heritage Foundation has expressed interest in featuring the project in their upcoming International Conference on Urban Conservation. The publicity alone would be quite valuable." Daniel controlled his surprise. This was news to him, but Eliza spoke with such authority that even he nearly believed it was already arranged. Vanessa's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "The Natural Heritage Foundation? Mother sits on their board of directors. She hasn't mentioned any such interest." "The foundation contacted me directly," Eliza replied without missing a beat. "Given my prior work with them on the watershed mapping project, I was planning to discuss it with Daniel once the hearing concluded." Charles Westfield looked between the four of them, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "Well, this is certainly an interesting development. Daniel, perhaps we should discuss these new opportunities in detail tomorrow." "I'd be happy to," Daniel agreed, recognizing the critical moment for what it was, a temporary reprieve rather than a definitive victory. As Westfield excused himself, Richard's composed facade slipped momentarily. "This isn't over," he said quietly, "not by a long shot." "Actually, Richard," Daniel replied, "I think it is. Whatever personal vendetta you and Vanessa are pursuing stops now, or the next conversation I have will be with investigative journalists about how Armstrong Holdings attempts to manipulate environmental regulations for competitive advantage." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Daniel, or what my sister is truly capable of." "I'm beginning to understand exactly what I'm dealing with," Daniel countered, "and who I can trust." He placed his hand gently at the small of Eliza's back. "Let's go. We have a project to build." As they walked away, leaving Richard and Vanessa seething in their wake, Eliza leaned close. "The Natural Heritage Foundation? That was a gamble." "A brilliant one," Daniel replied with admiration. "But was it true?" Eliza's smile was enigmatic. "Not yet, but it could be. I do have contacts there from my previous work." Daniel laughed, feeling lighter than he had in days despite knowing the battle was far from over. "You're full of surprises, Eliza Kane." "You haven't seen anything yet, architect," she replied, her amber eyes bright with promise and challenge in equal measure. The victory at the environmental hearing proved to be only the beginning of a more complex battle. Over the following week, Daniel found himself navigating a labyrinth of new obstacles. While the injunction had been lifted, Richard Armstrong's influence extended in unexpected directions. Subcontractors inexplicably backing out of commitments, permit applications mysteriously delayed, and most concerning, investors growing increasingly nervous despite Charles Westfield's continued support. "It's like fighting a hydra," Daniel told Eliza one evening as they sat on his balcony. reviewing the latest setbacks. Cut off one head, two more appear. That's Richard's specialty, Eliza replied, studying the project timeline Daniel had spread across the table. When direct confrontation fails, he switches to death by 1,000 cuts. I've seen him operate this way in other business situations. Despite the professional challenges, their personal connection had deepened over the past week. They'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm of working together in the evenings. Daniel addressing project issues, Eliza making calls to her contacts in the conservation community to shore up support for the Riverside project. The shared purpose had created an intimacy that felt both natural and profound. "Any word from Finnegan's about the inspection results?" Daniel asked, pouring them each another glass of wine. Eliza's expression brightened. "Actually, yes. They found absolutely nothing wrong with our import permits or conservation protocols. Jim thinks Richard's influence backfired. The inspectors were so thorough that they ended up documenting how exemplary our program actually is." "A rare, positive development," Daniel said with a smile, raising his glass in toast. "To unexpected benefits." Eliza clinked her glass against his. "Speaking of which, I have news about the Natural Heritage Foundation." "The bluff you threw at Charles Westfield?" Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Not a bluff anymore," Eliza replied with satisfaction. "I spoke with Dr. Helena Morales, the Foundation's conservation director. She was intrigued by the Riverside Project's integration of urban development with native habitat restoration. And she's coming to tour the site next week, with potential for featuring the project at their international symposium in December." Eliza's eyes sparkled with triumph. "Sometimes you have to speak things into existence." Daniel leaned across the table and kissed her, a spontaneous expression of admiration. "You're remarkable, you know that?" "Just resourceful," she replied, though her cheeks flushed with pleasure. "Growing up with Vanessa taught me to be creative in problem-solving." The mention of Vanessa shifted the mood slightly. They hadn't heard directly from her or Richard since the hearing, which felt more ominous than reassuring, like the silence before a storm. "Have you spoken to your mother?" Daniel asked carefully, knowing the complicated dynamics of Eliza's family. "She called yesterday," Eliza admitted, her expression growing somber. "Vanessa has been to visit her twice this week, apparently. Let me guess, painting you as the unstable sister obsessed with revenge?" "Something like that." Eliza stared out at the city lights. "According to my mother, I'm acting out by pursuing my sister's former fiancé as some sort of psychological compensation for my failed marriage." She spoke the words with clinical detachment, though Daniel could sense the hurt beneath. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth." Eliza turned back to him, her amber eyes steady. "That I met you by coincidence, that we connected over shared values and interests, and that Vanessa is the one who chose to make it a battleground." "Did she believe you?" A sad smile crossed Eliza's face. "My mother believes whoever spoke to her last, and Vanessa always ensures she gets the final word. But I've stopped measuring my worth by my mother's validation." Daniel took her hand across the table, struck once again by her resilience. "Their approval isn't worth pursuing when it's conditional on denying your own truth." "Exactly." Eliza squeezed his hand. "Though speaking of approval, your project manager called while you were in the shower. Something about the planning commission needing additional documentation for tomorrow's meeting?" Daniel groaned. "Another delay tactic, no doubt. I'll need to prepare those materials tonight." "I should head home anyway," Eliza said, beginning to gather her things. "I have early fieldwork at the river tomorrow, documenting the pre-construction plant communities." As she stood to leave, Daniel's phone rang, Marcus calling at nearly 10 p.m., which was unusual. "Everything okay?" Daniel answered. "Not exactly," Marcus replied, his voice tense. "Someone broke into the office, specifically targeted the Riverside Project files." Daniel straightened, instantly alert. "How bad?" Physical files disturbed, but nothing missing that we can tell. Security system alerted the police before they could do much damage, but they did access your computer." Marcus paused. "It is checking now to see if anything was compromised." "I'm coming in," Daniel said immediately. "No need tonight. Police are finishing up and we've got security on site. But you should know, one of the officers mentioned this is the third architectural firm break-in this month, all targeting specific project files." After hanging up, Daniel relayed the information to Eliza, whose expression grew troubled. "This is escalating beyond business tactics," she said quietly. "Breaking into your office. That's crossing a significant line. You don't think Richard would go that far, do you?" Eliza considered the question carefully. "Richard operates in gray areas. He typically ensures several layers of deniability between himself and anything legally questionable. But this feels different. More desperate. Or more personal," Daniel suggested. "Maybe this isn't just Richard." "Vanessa," Eliza whispered, a chill in her voice. "This feels like her influence. When Richard's calculated approach fails, Vanessa tends toward less rational responses." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, processing this disturbing development. "I should walk you to your car. If they're targeting the project, they might target people associated with it as well." "I've been thinking the same thing," Eliza admitted, pulling out her phone to show him a series of missed calls from blocked numbers. "Started yesterday. No messages, just calls every few hours." "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel asked, concern deepening. "Because there's nothing concrete to tell. It could be spam calls." She met his worried gaze. "But after hearing about the break-in, I'm not so sure." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced his apartment, mind racing through contingencies and worst-case scenarios. The project delays were concerning but manageable. Physical security breaches and possible harassment crossed into territory that felt fundamentally unsafe. By morning, his resolve had crystallized. After showering and dressing, he drove directly to the offices of Armstrong Holdings, bypassing the reception desk with determined strides that dared anyone to stop him. Richard's executive assistant jumped to her feet as Daniel approached the corner office. "Sir, you can't go in there without an appointment." Daniel ignored her, pushing open the heavy wooden door to find Richard on a conference call, feet propped casually on his massive desk. The surprise on the older man's face quickly morphed into calculated amusement. "I'll have to call you back," Richard told whoever was on the line, hanging up without waiting for a response. "Daniel Matthews, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "The break-in at my office last night," Daniel said without preamble. "It stops now. All of it stops." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with the detached interest of someone observing an insect. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't insult my intelligence," Daniel replied, his voice deadly calm. "The environmental injunction failed, so you moved to undermining investor confidence. When that didn't drive me away from the project or from Eliza, you escalated to criminal tactics." "That's quite an accusation," Richard said, his tone hardening. "One you couldn't possibly substantiate." "I don't need to substantiate it in court," Daniel countered. "Yet. What I need is for you and Vanessa to back off. The Riverside project has met every regulatory requirement. It poses no legitimate threat to your business interests. This vendetta is purely personal and it's become dangerous." Richard stood, his imposing height meant to intimidate. "I think you should leave before you say something truly regrettable, Matthews." "I've already recorded this conversation," Daniel bluffed, maintaining steady eye contact. "And I've documented every suspicious interference with my project since the injunction was filed. If anything happens to me, to Eliza, or to anyone associated with Riverside, that documentation goes to both the police and the business press." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Richard's typically controlled features. "You're overreacting to standard business competition." Breaking and entering isn't standard business competition, Daniel replied. Neither are harassment calls from blocked numbers. And if anything happens to Eliza's conservation work or to Finnegan's Nursery's import licenses, I'll know exactly where to point investigators. The office door opened before Richard could respond. Vanessa stood in the doorway, immaculately dressed as always, though her perfect composure faltered at the sight of Daniel. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, glaring at her husband. "Leaving," Richard replied smoothly, regaining his equilibrium. After making some rather dramatic accusations, Vanessa's gaze shifted to Daniel, something unreadable in her expression. "Let me guess. You think we're behind your recent difficulties?" "I know you are," Daniel replied simply, "and it's going to stop." A cold smile touched Vanessa's perfect lips. "Or what exactly?" "Or the next conversation I have will be with the district attorney about corporate espionage and criminal harassment," Daniel said, followed by a deeply personal interview with the Business Chronicle about how my ex-fiancée and her husband are threatening a conservation project because of their obsession with controlling who I date. The color drained from Vanessa's face. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Daniel challenged. "You abandoned our engagement without explanation, Vanessa. I accepted that and moved on. But I won't allow you to sabotage my career or threaten Eliza because you can't handle seeing us together." "This isn't about seeing you together," Vanessa hissed, her careful facade cracking. "This is about loyalty and betrayal. My own sister Daniel, the one person who should understand family obligations." The raw emotion in her voice surprised Daniel. For the first time, he glimpsed something beyond Vanessa's calculated manipulations, genuine hurt buried beneath layers of privilege and control. "Eliza didn't betray you," he said more gently. "She helped a stranded motorist who happened to be someone from her past. Whatever narrative you've created about her intentions isn't reality." "You don't know her like I do," Vanessa insisted, though uncertainty had crept into her tone. "She's always wanted what I have." "What you discarded," Daniel corrected. "There's a difference." Richard placed a possessive hand on his wife's shoulder. "I think this conversation has run its course, Matthews. Your message has been received? Has it?" Daniel held Richard's gaze. "The business competition will continue through legitimate channels," Richard stated coldly. "But there will be no further irregular tactics." It wasn't a complete capitulation, but it was an acknowledgement of boundaries, more than Daniel had realistically expected to achieve. He nodded once and turned to leave. "Daniel." Vanessa's voice stopped him at the door. When he looked back, her perfect mask had slipped completely, revealing the wounded woman beneath. "Was any of it real? Us?" The unexpected vulnerability of the question caught him off guard. 3 years ago, he would have given anything to have this conversation with her. Now he found himself searching for the kindest truth. "Parts of it were," he answered honestly, "but not enough of the important parts." Outside Armstrong Holdings, Daniel called Eliza immediately. "How's the fieldwork going?" "Just finishing up the north section documentation," she replied, ambient sounds of the riverside audible in the background. "Everything okay? You sound tense." "I paid Richard a visit," Daniel admitted, confronted him about the break-in and the harassment calls. A moment of shocked silence followed. "You did what?" "Daniel, that's necessary," he interrupted. This had gone beyond business tactics. I needed to establish clear boundaries. "And did you?" The concern in her voice was evident. "I think so. For now, at least." Daniel watched people stream in and out of the Armstrong building, each focused on their own concerns, unaware of the personal drama that had just unfolded in the executive suite. "Can you meet me for lunch? There's something I want to discuss." "Sounds serious," Eliza replied, her tone cautious. "It is," Daniel confirmed, "but not in the way you might think." 2 hours later, they sat in a quiet corner of a cafe near the riverside. Daniel had arrived first, securing a private table and ordering coffee while he waited. When Eliza entered, field clothes, slightly muddy and hair wind-blown from her morning's work, the sight of her, so genuine and unpretentious, confirmed everything he'd been considering since leaving Richard's office. "So," she said, settling across from him, "you confronted Richard Armstrong in his lair. How did that go?" "Better than expected," Daniel replied. "I think I made it clear that escalating to criminal tactics would have consequences neither of them want." Eliza studied him with concern. "That was incredibly risky, Daniel. Richard doesn't respond well to threats." "It wasn't a threat, just a statement of facts." Daniel reached across the table to take her hand. "But that's not what I wanted to discuss." "What then?" "Us." Daniel met her gaze directly. "These past 2 weeks have been intense, complicated, and at times genuinely stressful. But they've also shown me something important." Eliza's expression grew guarded. "Which is?" "That some complications are worth embracing," Daniel said simply. "Eliza, I've spent 3 years playing it safe, building walls, focusing on work instead of connections. And in less than 2 weeks, you've changed how I see everything." A mix of emotions played across her expressive face. Hope, caution, vulnerability. "Daniel." "I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised even him. "Not despite the complications, but in part because of how you navigate them with such integrity and courage." Eliza's amber eyes widened, her fingers tightening around his. "This is faster than I expected." "For me too," Daniel admitted with a smile. "But sometimes clarity arrives suddenly. Confronting Richard and Vanessa today, all I could think about was getting back to you, not because I needed to warn you about potential danger, but because you're becoming the person I want to share everything with." Tears gathered in Eliza's eyes, but she blinked them back, her practical nature asserting itself. "What about Vanessa? Richard? Everything they're still capable of doing to interfere?" "They'll either accept reality eventually or keep fighting losing battles," Daniel replied. "But I refuse to give them the power to determine what's possible between us." A slow smile spread across Eliza's face, transforming it with a joy that took Daniel's breath away. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you stood in the rain looking completely helpless with that flat tire." Daniel laughed, relief and happiness bubbling through him. "My incompetence with basic car maintenance finally paid off." Their shared laughter felt like a victory, a moment of genuine connection that no amount of external interference could diminish. What had begun as a chance encounter in the rain had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated but both now recognized as precious. "So," Daniel asked, "what happens next?" "Well," Eliza replied thoughtfully, "we still have a conservation project to save, a development to build, and probably more battles with my sister to navigate." Her smile turned mischievous. "But first, I think you should kiss me again, architect." As Daniel leaned across the table to comply, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. With an apologetic glance, he checked the screen, his office number flashing urgently. "I should take this," he said reluctantly. "Hello?" His assistant's panicked voice came through clearly. "Mr. Matthews, you need to come to the office immediately. There's been a fire at the Riverside site." Smoke still hung in the air when Daniel and Eliza arrived at the Riverside site. Fire trucks lined the perimeter, their red lights casting an eerie glow against the darkening sky. Yellow tape cordoned off the construction trailers, or what remained of them. The main structure was a charred skeleton, still occasionally hissing as firefighters doused stubborn embers. "What happened?" Daniel asked his site manager, who stood ashen-faced near the entrance. "Fire started in the main trailer where we keep the plans and permits," the man replied. "Spread fast, too fast according to the fire chief." "Accelerant?" Daniel asked, already knowing the answer. "Preliminary assessment suggests so. Police are treating it as suspicious." Eliza stood silently beside Daniel, surveying the destruction. Her focus landed on the riverside bank beyond the construction area. The riparian restoration areas? Untouched, the site manager confirmed. Fire was contained to the administrative section. Some tension visibly left Eliza's shoulders, though her expression remained grave. "This is beyond business tactics, Daniel. This is criminal." "And precisely what I warned Richard about this morning," Daniel replied, his voice low and controlled despite the fury building inside him. "This wasn't just about delaying the project, this was meant to destroy it completely." As they spoke, a police detective approached, introducing herself as Detective Rivera. "Mr. Matthews, I understand you're the architect and project lead." "Yes," Daniel confirmed, "and this is Eliza Kane, our conservation consultant." The detective nodded to Eliza before focusing on Daniel. "Any reason someone would want to target your project specifically?" Daniel and Eliza exchanged glances. "You should probably take notes," Daniel suggested. For the next 30 minutes, they detailed the escalating conflict with Armstrong Holdings, from the initial environmental injunction through the office break-in and culminating with Daniel's confrontation with Richard earlier that day. "So you directly threatened legal consequences if the harassment continued," Detective Rivera clarified, "and hours later your project site mysteriously catches fire." She raised an eyebrow. "Convenient timing. Too convenient," Daniel agreed, "though I doubt you'll find direct evidence linking Richard Armstrong to the arson. He's too careful for that." "Rich men usually are," the detective remarked dryly, "but hired help makes mistakes." She gestured toward the burned trailers. "We've got investigators working the scene now. If there's evidence to find, we'll find it." As she walked away, Eliza turned to Daniel. "What now?" Daniel surveyed the destruction, calculation replacing shock in his expression. "Now we rebuild, and we use this." "Use it how?" "The way we've approached everything else, with transparency and truth." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling every reporter who covered the environmental hearing. This isn't just about our project anymore. It's about criminal intimidation tactics used to subvert legitimate development." While Daniel made calls, Eliza walked to the riverside where her carefully marked conservation zones remained untouched by the fire. The juxtaposition was stark. Destruction on one side, preserved natural beauty on the other. A metaphor, perhaps, for the conflict they'd been navigating. By morning, the fire had made headlines in every local publication. Daniel's forthright interviews framed the incident as potential retaliation for the Environmental Board's decision, raising uncomfortable questions about business ethics and abuse of power. While he never directly accused the Armstrongs, the implication was clear to anyone following the controversy. Daniel and Eliza spent the day meeting with investigators, insurance adjusters, and the project team, assessing damage and developing recovery plans. The physical plans had been backed up digitally, and the permits could be reissued. The project would face delays but wasn't dead. Far from it. "The investor group is actually more committed now," Daniel told Eliza as they shared a late lunch between meetings. "Charles Westfield called personally to offer additional funding for enhanced security during reconstruction." "Public sympathy is a powerful thing," Eliza observed, scrolling through news coverage on her tablet. "The narrative has definitely shifted." Daniel's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Matthews," a familiar voice said. "Detective Rivera, we've identified a suspect in the arson case. Security cameras from a building across the river captured someone approaching your site shortly before the fire. We've matched him to an ex-employee of a security firm regularly contracted by Armstrong Holdings." Daniel exchanged meaningful glances with Eliza. "Have you made an arrest?" "Not yet, but we're close. Here's where it gets interesting. This individual received a substantial wire transfer yesterday morning, originating from an offshore account. Our financial crimes unit is tracing it now." "Let me guess," Daniel said. "The trail will get murky before it reaches anyone named Armstrong." "Probably," the detective agreed. "But we're putting pressure on the suspect. people tend to reconsider their loyalty when facing serious prison time. After hanging up, Daniel relayed the information to Eliza. "It's happening faster than I expected," he concluded. "Richard normally insulates himself better than this." "Because this wasn't Richard," Eliza replied, her expression troubled. "This has Vanessa written all over it. The timing, the emotional escalation, the sloppiness. Richard would never approve something this reckless right after your warning." Daniel considered this. "You think Vanessa acted independently?" "I'm almost certain of it." Eliza's phone chimed with a text notification. She glanced at it, her face paling slightly. "And I think I just got confirmation." She showed Daniel the message. "We need to talk, alone, about what Vanessa's done. Richard." "It could be a trap," Daniel warned. "Or it could be damage control," Eliza countered. "Either way, we need to know." The meeting was arranged at Neutral Ground, a private room in the city library, public enough for safety but secluded enough for discretion. Eliza insisted on going alone, despite Daniel's objections. "He'll speak more freely without you there," she argued, "and if this is legitimate, it could be our chance to end this definitively." The Richard Armstrong who met Eliza at the library looked markedly different from the polished businessman who had threatened her livelihood days earlier. His expensive suit was impeccable as always, but stress had etched new lines around his eyes, and his typically confident posture seemed slightly diminished. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. "I'll be direct. Vanessa acted without my knowledge regarding the fire at the Riverside site." Eliza studied him carefully. "Why should I believe you?" "Because criminal arson is a line even I wouldn't cross," Richard replied sharply. "Especially not after Matthew's explicit warning. I'm a businessman, not a fool." "But Vanessa is neither a businessman nor a fool," Eliza observed. "She's a woman who's used to getting what she wants through whatever means necessary." Richard's expression tightened. "My wife is emotional when it comes to certain matters." "You mean when it comes to Daniel and me?" Eliza leaned forward. "Why are you here, Richard? What do you want?" "Containment," he answered frankly. "The police have identified the arsonist, a former employee of a security company we occasionally contract. When they arrest him, it won't take long for the connection to surface." "And that concerns you because?" "Because while I had nothing to do with the fire, the appearance of impropriety could be damaging to Armstrong Holdings, to our reputation, to our business interests." Understanding dawned. "You're here to offer a deal." Richard nodded. "Vanessa made a terrible mistake, one I didn't authorize and wouldn't have permitted. But family loyalty compels me to protect her even from her own reckless actions." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Armstrong Holdings will publicly endorse the Riverside project, citing its exemplary environmental standards. We'll encourage expedited re-permitting and offer financial support for reconstruction." Richard's gaze was calculating but sincere. "In exchange, when the arsonist is arrested, you and Matthews refrain from publicly speculating about connections to us." Eliza considered his offer. "And Vanessa?" "I've made arrangements for her to enter a private wellness retreat. She needs perspective and distance from this situation." The clinical way he discussed institutionalizing his wife sent a chill through Eliza, too reminiscent of how her ex-husband had controlled her. "Is this voluntary on her part?" Something like genuine emotion flickered across Richard's face. "She agreed after I showed her the evidence connecting her to the arsonist. She understands the potential legal consequences." "And my conservation work? Finnegan's Nursery?" "All interference stops immediately. You have my word." Eliza almost laughed. "Your word hasn't proven particularly reliable so far." "Then consider it enlightened self-interest," Richard replied coolly. "This vendetta has already cost Armstrong Holdings significantly, both financially and in public goodwill. I'm a pragmatist above all else." After further negotiation, Eliza left with a written agreement outlining Richard's commitments. As she walked through the library's grand entrance, she spotted Daniel waiting anxiously in his car across the street, despite her insistence that she meet Richard alone. "You followed me," she said as she slipped into the passenger seat. "I was concerned," Daniel admitted unapologetically. "What happened?" Eliza handed him the agreement. "Richard is cutting his losses, and Vanessa's. You believe him?" "I believe his business instincts," Eliza replied, "which is why I had him put everything in writing, including his commitment to provide information to the police about how the arsonist was hired, without implicating Vanessa directly." Daniel reviewed the document, impressed by the concessions Eliza had secured. "This is more than I expected. Richard is nothing if not practical. The fire crossed a line he wasn't willing to defend." Eliza leaned back in her seat, suddenly exhausted. "Vanessa is being sent to a wellness retreat. Richard's euphemism for getting her out of the way while he cleans up her mess." "Is she going willingly?" "Apparently." Eliza's expression softened slightly. "I know she's done terrible things, but I can't help feeling a little sorry for her. Living entirely for appearances and control seems so empty." Daniel reached for her hand. "You're remarkably compassionate, considering everything she's put us through." "She's still my sister," Eliza said simply. "Half-sister," she corrected with a small smile, echoing her earlier insistence on the distinction. The weeks that followed brought swift changes. True to Richard's word, Armstrong Holdings publicly endorsed the Riverside Project's environmental innovations. The arsonist was arrested and confessed to being hired through an intermediary, though Vanessa's name remained absent from official reports. Construction resumed with enhanced security and renewed community support. 3 months later, Daniel and Eliza stood at the riverside watching as the first structural beams of the development rose against the autumn sky. Nearby, Eliza's conservation team was planting native species along the water's edge, the practical implementation of the illustrations that had brought them together. "It's really happening," Eliza mused, her hand comfortably entwined with Daniel's. "Despite everything they tried?" "Because of everything they tried," Daniel corrected. "Without Vanessa's interference, we might never have found each other. Without Richard's injunction, the environmental benefits of this project wouldn't have received such public attention." "Silver linings from storm clouds," Eliza agreed. She hesitated before adding, "I heard from my mother yesterday. Vanessa's returning next week." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Are you worried?" "Not like before," Eliza replied thoughtfully. "The experience seems to have genuinely affected her. My mother says she's different, quieter, less concerned with appearances." "People can change," Daniel observed, "when forced to confront the consequences of their actions." "Some people," Eliza amended. "Those willing to see the truth about themselves." They walked along the riverside path, stopping at a bench overlooking the water. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the landscape, transforming the construction site into something almost beautiful, potential taking physical form. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, turning to face her. "This project will take another year to complete. The conservation work even longer." "Ecological restoration is a long-term commitment," Eliza agreed. "Exactly, which is why I've been considering other long-term commitments." Daniel reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small box, the kind that last well beyond construction timelines. Eliza's amber eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "Daniel? I know it hasn't been that long," he continued, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring with a small emerald instead of a traditional diamond. "But when you know, and I know that I want to build more than just buildings with you, Eliza Kane." Tears gathered in her eyes as Daniel knelt on one knee. "I love your authenticity, your courage, your compassion, even for those who don't deserve it. I love how you fight for what matters, and how you've taught me to do the same." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" Eliza's smile was radiant through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, a blue truck pulled into the construction site parking area. They both recognized it immediately, the same vehicle that had stopped to help with a flat tire on a rainy day that now seemed like a lifetime ago. "You planned this," Eliza said, noticing the truck was now decorated with streamers and a "She Said Yes" sign clearly prepared in advance. "I had faith," Daniel replied with a grin. "Also, Jim from the nursery might have helped with the preparations." As friends emerged from the truck with champagne and congratulations, Eliza pulled Daniel close for a kiss that held both promise and gratitude. What had begun with a simple act of kindness, a woman helping a stranded motorist, had transformed into something neither could have anticipated, but both now recognized as the foundation for a future built on truth, respect, and genuine love. "From flat tires to forever," Daniel murmured against her lips. "Who would have thought?" "I would," Eliza replied with certainty. "The moment I saw you standing in the rain, completely hopeless with that jack in the wrong place." "My finest moment," Daniel laughed. As they joined their friends in celebration, the Riverside Project continued taking shape around them, a tangible reminder that sometimes the most beautiful creations emerge from the most unexpected challenges. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.